but the president was speaking with the conference this morning, very engaging. I did leave a few minutes, I don't know how long before he finished, but I felt I needed to get here at least with some semblance, but I do apologize to you, Mr. Administrator, and to all the members who were here on time. Please forgive me. I will try not to let it happen again, but it is rare that the president comes to talk to the conference. All right, I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. I am glad to have the Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Lee Zeldin, a friend and former colleague, back in the House today. Welcome back, Mr. Administrator. Is that the proper way to refer to you?
Call me Lee.
All right, Lee. It's glad to have you back to testify before the Subcommittee on Environment on President Trump's fiscal year 2026 budget request. This is certainly an important time for the EPA. After 4 years of economically disastrous, legally questionable, and expensive policies of the Biden-Harris administration, it is a welcome sight to see President Trump and Administrator Zeldin focused on the rebuilding of the American economy and fixing the problems of the previous administration. I remember when Administrator Zeldin was in the House representing the eastern part of Long Island. He was willing to work across the aisle in a pragmatic way to try and address environmental issues like protecting the Long Island Sound or addressing emerging contaminants like PFAS. It is great to see him bringing these same problem-solving skills to the EPA, and there are a lot of problems there to solve, as we all know. I am pleased to see that the Administrator recognizes that there is a middle ground to tread where environmental protection does not need to come at the expense of good jobs and a strong economy. I know that the Administrator is already working to closely examine the previous EPA spending spree on Green New Deal-style programs that provided unprecedented levels of taxpayer funds to environmental groups and consultants and to undo burdensome regulations that increased energy costs and made it more difficult to make things in America. The reconciliation bill passed out of this committee last week is an important step in saving taxpayers money and redirecting the EPA to focus on its core mission of cleaning up the environment and protecting human health. In February, Administrator Zeldin announced the broad pillars that the agency will focus on under his plan, Powering the Great American Comeback. In March, Administrator Zeldin announced 31 regulatory actions to support greater energy production, a more robust auto manufacturing sector, a more predictable permitting process, and a more state-based enforcement system. I'm glad to see that the EPA is taking another look at a lot of the rulemakings from the last administration, particularly those regarding air pollution, as many of those rulemakings didn't take into account industry's ability to meet compliance timelines on which pollution mitigation technologies would be able to be installed. EPA has a duty to enforce the statutes that Congress passed, though I do believe encouraging cooperative compliance with industry will lead to better environmental outcomes and less economic disruption. And as I've often said, one of the problems we have is if we push beyond what industry can do, they just pick up and move to another country. And many of those pollutants, according to a NASA study, come right back to us because the NASA study showed a number of years ago, following a sandstorm, that it takes about 10 days for the air to get from the middle of the Gobi Desert in China to the eastern shore of Virginia. As many of those rulemakings that the EPA did previously didn't take into account industry's ability to meet compliance timelines, that's what we're talking about, of which pollution mitigation technologies were able to be installed. In recent years, the EPA's budget has been about $10 billion per year. However, under the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, the EPA received an astounding $41.5 billion, or more than 4 times its historical budget, to spend on electric vehicles, environmental justice, and renewable energy programs. From its founding and up until the past few years, EPA mostly operated as a scientific investigator and regulatory agency, and with the exception of the water infrastructure and Superfund programs, it did not administer lots of large grants. President Trump's proposed budget would reduce EPA spending to a more sustainable level after years of out-of-control spending on programs and rules that bore little relation to the EPA's traditional mission of regulating pollution, setting science-based standards for potentially hazardous substances, and cleaning up waste sites. It seems the goal of EPA in the last few years was an attempt to force change that Americans are not willing to buy. I look forward to hearing more details from Administrator Zeldin about the reorganization and reform efforts he's making. The Environment Subcommittee stands ready to work with you, Administrator Zeldin, to help get the EPA back on track. As at this subcommittee's first hearing of Congress, we examined the implementation of the 2016 amendments to the Toxic Substance Control Act, often referred to as TSCA. We heard how the process of reviewing new and existing chemicals are in need of reform, particularly the ways in which the EPA evaluates potential chemical risks. We also held a hearing in March on ways to maximize brownfield cleanups. As we work on brownfield reauthorization, I hope to collaborate with the EPA on ways to possibly set up some sort of pre-clearance permitting pilot program. Our national security, our economic competitiveness, the health of our families, and the strength of our communities all depend on an EPA led by you that is working hard and efficiently for the American people. So I thank you again for appearing before us today and forgiving me for being late, and I look forward to your testimony. I now yield 5 minutes to the ranking member, Mr. Tonko of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Administrator Zeldin, welcome to the committee, to the subcommittee. And I have to acknowledge that as a former student, you're a constituent of New York's 20th Congressional District, and so we welcome you back in that capacity. President Trump's fiscal year 2026 budget request for EPA has been called problematic, an unserious proposal, and maybe a bridge too far to be achievable. Now, these were the reactions of Republican appropriators last week, and I expect you will hear even less charitable reviews from Democrats on this subcommittee today. This proposal includes a 55% reduction from fiscal year 25 levels, resulting in agency funding levels not seen since the mid-1980s. If enacted, this would fundamentally dismantle the EPA as we know it and cripple the agency's ability to carry out its core mission of protecting the air we breathe and the water we drink. The request includes devastating cuts that will undermine states' efforts to protect public health and carry out their obligations, including the $2.46 billion reduction to the state revolving funds for water infrastructure and a $1 billion reduction for categorical grants, which are critical to supporting staffing of state environmental agencies. I do believe this is a part of a disturbing trend we are seeing to force more costs onto state governments, as is being done with the proposed cuts to Medicaid in the majority's reconciliation bill. Similar to these funding cuts, earlier this year, the administration expressed a desire to reduce EPA staffing levels by 65%, which would return the agency to 1971 personnel levels, the agency's second year in existence. It is not credible to suggest that the agency can fulfill its statutory requirements, including all of the major environmental laws and amendments to those laws that have been enacted since the 1970s, with these proposed staffing levels. Cuts of this magnitude would not only hollow out the agency's expertise and capacity, but they are insensitive to the public servants who have dedicated their lives to supporting this agency's mission. And it is worth reminding everyone of what that mission is, to protect human health and the environment. In just a few short months, I believe the agency under Administrator Zeldin's leadership has lost sight of this mission. Mr. Zeldin launched the Powering the Great American Comeback initiative, focused on American energy, auto manufacturing, and artificial intelligence dominance. Broadly speaking, I'm not necessarily opposed to aspects of that agenda, but I also do not believe it is the appropriate role for our nation's environmental regulator to be leading this effort, because EPA's contributions to those goals more or less translate to how we can reduce environmental protections and enforcements of those protections for the benefit of energy producers, the auto industry, and big tech, even if ordinary Americans will pay the price by breathing harmful air pollution, drinking contaminated water, and being exposed to dangerous chemicals. We have already seen a slew of agency actions that will result in greater pollution and reduce our scientific capacity to understand just how that pollution will impact Americans' health and their well-being. This includes reconsidering rules that protect Americans from pollution, from power plants, from vehicles, and from industrial facilities, and weakening standards to keep PFAS out of our drinking water. Each of these public health protections up for reconsideration went through robust rulemaking processes and economic analyses, which found that every one of these rules delivers greater benefits to the American people in public health and in economic benefit terms than they cost. I am also concerned by EPA's efforts to terminate previously awarded grants without producing any evidence of fraud, waste, or abuse. For each of these awards, the previous administration carried out competitive selection processes based upon requirements enacted by Congress. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'm now going to recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, for his 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. President Trump's budget is a blueprint for disaster. Trump doesn't believe in government, and his budget continues his relentless assault on the federal agencies whose mission it is to protect the health and well-being of the American people. This budget would cut funding for the EPA by 55%, the largest cut in EPA's history. The proposed cut would seriously threaten public health and the environment. It also fails to deliver on many of the promises the Trump administration has made to deal with dangerous toxins like lead and PFAS and prioritize polluters over public health and the environment. While we only have the skinny budget to review at this stage, it does not give me confidence that anything more comprehensive will tell a different story. The budget calls categorical grants to states a crutch, flying in the face of the cooperative federalism that has made EPA so successful in cleaning up toxic pollution and providing healthier futures for Americans. EPA is deserting the states to deal with serious climate and pollution issues on their own, while EPA focuses on giving polluters free passes to poison our communities with reckless abandon. And the skinny budget outlines major cuts to historically bipartisan programs that provide a lifeline to communities across the nation. It cuts $250 million from the Superfund program, undermining our ability to clean up toxic waste sites throughout the nation. It seeks to decimate the drinking water and clean water state revolving funds, which are the primary funding sources for water infrastructure projects. These state revolving funds are critical to ensuring communities have safe, reliable drinking water and wastewater services. This comes after EPA recently announced plans to rescind and delay the historic PFAS drinking water standard, raising serious questions about the Trump administration's commitment to safe, clean, and affordable water for all. EPA is also walking away from its commitments by canceling competitively awarded grants where work is already underway in communities across the country with little or no explanation. And I have to say to the administrator, I am outraged by Administrator Zeldin's illegal freeze of obligated funds under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. This fund is meant to make energy more affordable, foster economic development, boost supply chains, and create good-paying jobs, all the things that the Trump administration says it supports. Yet the administrator has engaged in a smear campaign where he's spreading false and misleading statements about the program in an attempt to undermine it and strip away these funds. And I firmly believe the administrator's actions are a violation of the law, and I'm hopeful that these funds will be released soon so that our communities can benefit from these investments. It's clear to me that under Administrator Zeldin's leadership, EPA is becoming an unreliable partner and illegally withholding congressionally directed funds. I'm also concerned about troubling activities that will endanger the health and safety of American families, children, and workers. The Trump administration has made it clear that EPA cares more about polluters' bottom line than the communities and American children who will bear the brunt of these foolhardy decisions. What is potentially most egregious is the attempt to roll back EPA's landmark endangerment finding. It's absolutely shocking that anyone in the year 2025 could look around and honestly say that climate change is not already harming Americans. It is. And I'm also troubled by EPA's recent reorganization plan. The effectiveness of the agency hinges on EPA having the career staff necessary to fulfill its mission. They are the backbone of the agency. Unfortunately, Administrator Zeldin's actions to indiscriminately fire hundreds of employees with plans to relieve thousands more shows a blatant disregard for the critical work career staff conduct on behalf of the American people every day. He continues to disingenuously claim to be fighting government waste while simultaneously eviscerating EPA's ability to appropriately manage programs and oversee issue grants. Finally, Administrator Zeldin is thumbing his nose at Congress's ability to conduct important oversight of this administration. Committee Democrats have sent several letters to the administrator demanding answers about certain actions he's taken. We've received very few answers, some coming just late yesterday, and this is unacceptable. The Energy and Commerce Committee is your authorizer, and we are tasked with conducting oversight. As administrator of EPA, you don't just owe Congress an explanation, but you also owe the American people an explanation. You know, my Republicans on this committee constantly talk about how great this committee is and how they want to continue the great work of this committee. But we're not going to be a great committee if we can't actually conduct oversight over the EPA, which is one of the major agencies that we have oversight or jurisdiction over. We're not going to be a great committee if we can't have effective oversight, and Administrator Zeldin has made that impossible. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. I thank the gentleman. We now conclude with member opening statements. The chair would like to remind members that pursuant to the committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made a part of the record. Although it is not the practice of this subcommittee to swear in witnesses, I would remind our witness that knowingly and willfully making material false statements to the legislative branch is against the law under Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code. We will give you an opportunity to give an opening statement followed by questions. Today's witness, I think, is known to all of us, a former member of the House, the Honorable Lee Zeldin, Administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Mr. Zeldin, you are now recognized for a 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Griffith, Ranking Member Tonko, and members of the subcommittee. Chairman Griffith, thank you for being such a great partner and ensuring that this committee is able to work closely with the EPA. That's very important. Thank you for the great work and leadership. It is an honor to appear before you today to discuss the President's Fiscal Year 2026 budget request for the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Since day one, EPA has swiftly moved to advance President Trump's directive to deliver clean air, land, and water for all Americans, while restoring common sense, accountability, and cooperative federalism to environmental policy. We're fulfilling our core mission of protecting human health and the environment while powering the great American comeback and removing unnecessary barriers that have burdened American families and businesses for far too long. Since being sworn in as administrator, my team has hit the ground running. I've now traveled to 17 states across the country, engaging with our dedicated regional staff and scientists, visiting Superfund sites and brownfields, and listening to farmers, business owners, and community residents who have had fantastic ideas on how the EPA can better work on their behalf. Immediately upon President Trump's inauguration, EPA completed the largest wildfire cleanup in agency history in less than 30 days after the catastrophic Los Angeles wildfires. We have taken bold steps to combat PFAS contamination and have advanced redevelopment at 21 Superfund sites across 13 states, delisting all or parts of 4 sites from the national priorities list. We've also completed 25 state implementation plans, 16 of which were backlogged from the prior administration. With this renewed focus and commitment, EPA is working for the American people. We are revising the definition of waters of the United States to align with the Supreme Court decision in Sackett, and have issued immediate action items for Mexico to permanently and urgently end the Tijuana River sewage crisis that has plagued Southern California for decades. Following my trip to St. Louis, we cut nearly 2 years from the cleanup timeline at the Westlake Superfund site, which has been contaminated by nuclear waste from the Manhattan Project. In fact, to mark the 100th day of the Trump presidency, EPA released a list of 100 environmental actions we took during those first 100 days, a pace that motivates us to keep up each and every day. Together, these actions reflect the administration's commitment to environmental stewardship, cooperative federalism, and delivering results that make a real difference in people's lives. In lockstep with the president's agenda, EPA is also helping to unleash American energy, pursue permitting reform, make America the AI capital of the world, and bring back American auto jobs. We've eliminated waste and abuse in areas like the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, reversed unlawful overreach like the so-called Good Neighbor Rule, and begun reconsidering many overreaching rules, including power plant and EV-related regulation that threaten grid reliability, energy affordability, and consumer choice. I'm proud of the monumental steps we took earlier this year towards energy dominance and expanding cooperative federalism. We are giving West Virginia and Arizona the primacy authority they have sought to protect groundwater and regulate themselves, as other states have had for years. It is no secret that the best innovative solutions are often found by working with those most familiar with the challenges faced. These historic actions will reduce regulatory costs, which act as invisible taxes on Americans, making it more affordable to own a car, heat homes, operate a business, and bring manufacturing back to local communities. By reducing the EPA's budget by billions of dollars, the President's FY 2026 budget demands maximum efficiency from the EPA while we continue to fulfill all of our statutory obligations. Also included in the President's proposal is an additional $9 million above FY 2025 enacted levels to equip EPA with funds to respond to drinking water disasters. There is also a $27 million increase in funding for tribes to address drinking water and wastewater infrastructure on their lands. At the Trump EPA, we will not view the status quo as a sacred cow that is untouchable. We will not consider the Biden-era regulations we inherited to be etched in stone, and we absolutely refuse to waste even a penny of tax dollars. With President Trump's leadership and the partnership of Congress, we will deliver measurable and real results, greater accountability, and a stronger environmental return on investment per dollar spent. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Administrator Zeldin, AKA Lee. We will now begin questioning. I would ask that members not begin a new question to our witness as their 5 minutes expire. Because we have a number of members who wish to waive on, and that is the practice in this subcommittee and in this committee, I am going to be fairly aggressive on the 5-minute deadline on both sides of the aisle. And so I would encourage you all to be ready to submit. If you see you only have 10 seconds left, don't ask the question, just submit it for questions asked after the hearing, which we are permitted to do. With that said, I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Administrator Zeldin, I understand why the agency terminated all environmental justice grants to align with President Trump's executive order. I recognize those, in many cases, were spurious. But as often happens when you do this, there's some things in there that you think, wait a minute, that was pretty good. And so in my district, we had some flood mitigation, and these are not huge dollars, $50,000 in flood mitigation planning for the town of Clinchco, $50,000 in engineering for a former bank building demolition. The building is going to collapse into the road, and it's a problem. And Riverwalk design in the town of Pound, and $70,000 demolition of a building in Pennington Gap, which flooded again in February. All of these are issues that are significant, and I don't know what they did to be put into an environmental justice. This is just something right to do, and I'm just asking you if you would be willing to help us work to see if we can't find some other ways to take care of some of those important projects that actually are meritorious.
Love to work with you, Chairman. Have my team work with yours, and the same message goes to other members of this committee. There are some cases of grants where the entire grant had major issues, and there are other grants where there were smaller issues, and there's appropriated funding that is going to continue to go out the door. We're having this conversation in the middle of a fiscal year. So while we are going from one administration to the next, we might go from one administration's priorities to the current administration's priorities. I think, have plenty of opportunities to be able to work together to get this funding out responsibly.
All right, now I'm going to turn to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund awards. I know that that's all tied up in litigation, but it's interesting to me, and I talked about it last week as well. One of the awardees is technically headquartered in my district in Southwest Virginia, actually in Christiansburg, the Appalachian Community Capital. And I understand it's a bank and a financial institution and it's a pass-through. The problem is that this organization received $500 million. Previously, in 2023, their entire budget was $4.3 million, of which 2.8 was from a federal grant. In 2024, they suddenly received $500 million. Now, when I found out about this, and I went and looked at their legal address, where they're supposed to be headquartered in Christiansburg, Virginia, I went up to the building. It was after hours. There's no sign. There is a financial institution there, but it's not the Appalachian Community Capital. Now, whether they have a person assigned in there, whether or not they have a cubicle. I don't know. Not saying they don't, not saying they're not functioning out of that building, but there's no indication to the public that this institution, which received $500 million to hand out from the EPA, is doing anything there. Now, again, they very well could have a cubicle inside. They could have somebody in there working, but the sign on the door was for a different financial institution. The CEO has an address in Washington, D.C. So if we're trying to get these monies out, even if you accept that they're trying to get these monies out into the various communities, it raises all kinds of questions in my mind. I'm assuming that raised questions in your mind as well. Am I correct? That type of thing.
Yes, Chairman, and to that point, it's important to point out Appalachian asked for $1 billion, and they ended up receiving $500 million, even though the year that they asked for the funding in 2023, they spent less than $4.5 million. One of many issues, and one more thing to point out, Chairman, a reviewer noted that Appalachian planned to use $215 million to finance 600 zero-emission vehicles and $105 million to finance 700 charging stations. This is $358,333 per EV vehicle, $150,000 per charging station. So it's important to get into the weeds and understand, and I think the example that you brought up is one of many fantastic ones to talk about.
Well, and I'd love to know where the charging stations are if they exist. That being said, in my time running out, I will yield back and now recognize the ranking member from New York, Mr. Tonko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, welcome, Mr. Zeldin. You previously committed to following the law and stated your belief that science should be left to the scientists. So I would like to focus on just how well you've been fulfilling those commitments. To start, you initiated an effort to reconsider the 2009 endangerment finding that greenhouse gas emissions threaten the public health and welfare of current and future generations. Now, I have no doubt we may disagree about just how to appropriately regulate sources of climate pollution, but I'm frankly shocked that there is a question of whether or not climate pollution harms the Americans' health and welfare. The endangerment finding is based on science, and scientists both within and without the federal government have continually reaffirmed that climate pollution does in fact harm our health and our welfare. So can you cite any peer-reviewed research that calls into question the science used to make the initial 2009 endangerment finding?
Well, first off, Ranking Member Tonko, it's important to note to follow the law, to follow our obligations under the law. I'm not allowed to prejudge outcomes. We're going to go through a rulemaking process. We'll follow the Administrative Procedures Act. There will be a public comment period. To your point more specifically, it's important to note that when the 2009 endangerment finding was done, they didn't review carbon dioxide alone. It's carbon dioxide when mixed with 5 other well-mixed gases, which was called the greenhouse gases. Even though they were supposed to do it specifically on mobile sources, some of those greenhouse gases, some of those other well-mixed gases aren't even emitted from motor vehicles, but they didn't study each of these 6 individually. They studied all 6 collectively. They had multiple other mental leaps that were done. They didn't say that carbon dioxide endangers public health. They say that carbon dioxide, when mixed with 5 other well-mixed gases, contribute to climate change. How much, you might ask? They don't say, but the number's north than 0. They said contribute, not causes. And then they say climate change endangers public health. So it's just important to follow the multiple mental leaps, but as far as peer-reviewed studies, it's important to note when that 2009 endangerment finding was reached, they didn't study any of these 6 gases individually.
Reclaiming my time, I hear the prejudged statement, but I don't think major regulatory processes are launched on a whim. So can you not point to any scientific evidence to warrant a reconsideration in the first place?
Well, in addition to what I just stated, they also didn't factor in any of obviously the scientific developments since over the last 16 years. There has not been any public comment period over the course of the last 16 years. They haven't factored in innovation. Emissions have been down over the course of the last 20 years. But getting back to the heart of your initial question, that not even when they did the 2009 endangerment finding, did they ever conduct reviews of each emission individually.
Well, in addition to the elimination of atmospheric research, I'm very concerned by the public reporting around the future of the Office of Research and Development. ORD conducts independent research, and this independence is critical to both informing regulatory decision-making and ensuring high levels of scientific integrity at the agency. The Office of Inspector General identified, and I quote, promoting ethical conduct and protecting scientific integrity, close quote, as a top management challenge in fiscal year 2024. How do you plan to address this challenge if ORD is significantly reorganized or, in fact, eliminated?
Well, for one, we will fulfill all statutory obligations. Two, it's important to note that inside of program offices, science and research is done. Additionally, as part of the reorg that was announced a couple weeks back, science and research are being elevated inside of all different program offices. There's a new office inside of the Office of Air and Radiation focusing on state air partnerships, advancing cooperative federalism, and working on state implementation plans. There's a new Office of Applied Sciences and Environmental Solutions. The scientific work that we do in fulfilling our statutory obligations is important.
Okay, let me reclaim my time here. Has EPA evaluated how closing or significantly reducing ORD would affect its ability to fulfill statutory obligations while ensuring scientific integrity across the agency?
Absolutely.
And will you share that evaluation with members of the subcommittee?
Sure, we could talk about it here today.
Okay. Well, my time has expired, so I will yield back, but thank you for your response.
The ranking member yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, for his 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Administrator, welcome back to the House. Good to see you today. You know, for far too long, the EPA has ballooned well beyond its original scope. Over time, the agency has amassed sweeping regulatory powers that increasingly bypass legislative oversight. What does that leave us with? High costs for the taxpayer, burdensome, unworkable regulatory conditions for industry, stifled innovation in manufacturing, and energy insecurity with decreased domestic production, high costs, and federal overreach for our energy mix. We heard extensive testimony from industry leaders across the board that the Biden administration's EPA standards were technologically unfeasible. President Trump proposed discretionary budget decreases the EPA budget by over half of last year's budget, making many common sense reforms to spend American taxpayer dollars in thoughtful ways to effectively improve our environment. And one of the things that we've heard so many times is, you know, what are your thoughts, especially when we heard from the industry, that the EPA would come up with some kind of a standard that there was no existing technology to even meet it, but they were demanding that it be done. In a lot of cases, it was going to put businesses out of business because they couldn't meet the standard. So how do you see the EPA dealing in the future on issues like that?
We inherited a lot of regulations that were enacted in 2023, 2024, seeking to strangulate the economy, choosing to suffocate the economy as if it's a binary choice between protecting the environment and growing the economy. The Trump EPA chooses both. We want to protect the environment and grow the economy. This isn't a binary choice. These regulations would cause all sorts of companies and entire industries to have to go out. The concerns end up impacting the American economy, the American national security, and our environment, as it's important to point out that we tap into our own supply safer than so many other countries do elsewhere around the world. And it is important to look at the ability of American companies to be able to hit the compliance with these regulations that are put into place.
Oh, thank you. You know, I read with interest your Powering the Great American Comeback. And, you know, in this committee, we've been talking about two things in particular. We have to have more energy produced in this country. And at the same time, we have to really make sure that when we're looking at permitting, we got to get the permitting reform done to be able to move forward. Because especially when we look at our data centers that are coming online, that the amount of more energy is going to have to be produced in this country. So could you share how the Powering the Great American Comeback initiative is going to help, especially in these two areas that you talk about on the energy side and also on the permitting?
Sure, there's 5 pillars. Number 1, clean air, land, and water for all Americans. Number 2 is unleash energy dominance. Pillar 3 advance cooperative federalism and permitting reform. 4, making America the AI capital of the world. 5, bringing back American auto jobs. Why are we doing this? Because the American public is demanding it. The core mission of EPA is protecting human health and the environment. So one might ask, well, why would you be working on helping to unleash energy dominance? Well, because we were paying attention to the American public last fall when they were demanding that we heed their concerns as it relates to their struggle to be able to afford to make ends meet. Because we heard from Americans who had to choose between whether or not to put groceries in their refrigerator, heat their home, or get prescription drugs they need to survive. They had to choose between the 3. So we could say, listen, we're not going to do anything to help with this other stuff. It's not part of the core mission of EPA, and we could thumb our nose to the American public. But instead, the Trump EPA chooses to heed the call of the American public. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do it proudly. Now, as it relates to the 2 that you might be referencing as far as unleashing energy dominance, make America the AI capital of the world, this is a partnership and working with other agencies. The President created the National Energy Dominance Council. These agencies are going to work together. And when you talk about permitting reform, here's an idea. Those who want to invest in America, that they don't have to go through 15 months of a permitting process before some other agency comes in and tells them, here's an issue that's going to stop your project. The person who's making the investment scratching their head and said, well, why didn't you tell us that 15 months ago? Well, that's because the government was being its normal self and not working efficiently, not collaboratively, and as a result, the permitting process might require more time, more cost, less certainty. So EPA is going to do our part, and one of the ways that we can help with permitting reform actually doesn't even require an act of Congress. We could just stop gumming up the works with all sorts of different processes that we inherited where we realized the EPA was just trying to slow things down to slow things down. Well, we don't feel good about taking away, stripping away that investment in this country, and I'm glad that you're asking, Congressman, and I look forward to working with you on it.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired, and I yield back, and I'll submit my other questions to the administrator in writing. Thank you.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the ranking member of the committee, Mr. Pallone, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I have to disagree with the administrator's vision. I don't think anyone in America voted last November to ask the government to harm their health and safety. And if you're talking about grocery prices, they're not lower, they're higher. And if you talk about our energy dominance, that has to be linked to clean energy, which you and the Trump administration just are completely getting rid of. And if you talk about getting a permit, well, under the reconciliation bill, which is the reason I think most of our colleagues aren't here on the other side of the aisle, is because the president is here trying to convince them to vote for that garbage. And under that bill, if you just pay $1 million, I guess that's for the LNG permit, or you pay $10 million for a pipeline permit, then you automatically get the permit and you don't have to go through any kind of EPA review whatsoever because the permit and the payment of the check is deemed in the public interest. So, you've undertaken multiple waves of utterly arbitrary and harmful cuts to important programs and grants. Thankfully, courts have recognized that your actions are illegal and have ordered a hold on these mass terminations and withholding of funds unless you could show that grants were only terminated after an individual review. And EPA officials have attempted to exploit that loophole by asserting that grants have been individually reviewed without offering evidence to support such claims. Fortunately, the courts have not been falling for it. One judge recently wrote that even after reviewing thousands of pages of documents produced by the EPA, there was not a single document demonstrating an individual review of any individual grantee. In another case, an EPA official submitted a sworn declaration stating that, and I'm quoting now, EPA leadership conducting an individualized grant-by-grant review to determine which grants should continue, which should be modified, and which should be terminated. But a declaration in a separate case indicates that another Trump appointee in a single day conducted a review and determined that 9 entire programs constituting hundreds of grants should be terminated. And I'd ask unanimous consent to enter the declarations of Daniel Coogan and Travis Boyles into the record. Mr. Chairman, these are actually court records. There are two EPA Trump employees that have contradicted each other, in my opinion, on individual review issue. In any case, if I'll hold them so I can reference them if necessary and then give them to you, Mr. Chairman.
And
If
are
that's
is it the
okay.
complete transcript of their testimony or just an affidavit?
Transcript of their
If
testimony.
it's a complete transcript, then that
All
should-
right,
should be
thank you, Mr.
acceptable.
Chairman. But I want to clear this up with a question of the Administrator. Please explain what, if any, process EPA has undertaken to individually review grants prior to their termination, who was involved in that process, and what records exist documenting the supposed process of this review for each individual terminated grant, if you could.
That's been an extensive process. First, it's important to point out that one of the two employees you mentioned are actually a career EPA employee. It's not a Trump political appointee. When we came in, we started working with the career staff that was here previously. That includes career staff involved with oversight or lack thereof of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund.
But Mr. Zeldin, I know, because I'm going to be cut off by the chairman, not that he's, trying to do it, but the time is there. I would like what records exist documenting the supposed process of this review for each individual terminated grant. If you can't give that to me today, then I would ask that you submit it through the chairman in the future, as soon as possible. Would that be okay?
It would be whatever explanation that you're looking for. Again, we have a process
Okay,
that
you
we
said
follow
you'll
with every
provide it. Now,
individual.
let me
grant.
ask you one more question, and then I'll close. Do you think that one EPA official deciding in a single day that 9 separate programs with hundreds of grants should be terminated constitutes an individualized review? That's what one of the employees said to the court. Do you think that
I was the one who made the decision, and I made the decision after doing an individual review of every grant specifically. I personally
did not
reviewed every single grant that I canceled.
Okay. Now, in my opinion, in the time that you've led this agency, you've decimated the critical work the EPA does. You've left communities across the country scrambling with few answers. Your polluter-first agenda will have a damaging impact on American workers, families, and children for years to come. And if this is the great American comeback, then I pray for the country. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back and now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Joyce, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Griffith and Ranking Member Tonko, for holding this important hearing. And thank you, Administrator Zeldin, for testifying here today. The Biden administration's EPA championed the worst tendencies of bureaucracy, unleashing a slew of burdensome rules that were often unrealistic or impossible for U.S. businesses, U.S. farmers, or U.S. communities to address. Now, with the Trump administration and your leadership, we have seen a return to a more common sense approach that seeks to realize our shared goal of a cleaner and a healthier environment by prioritizing engagement with all stakeholders and leveraging something that we recognize to be so important, and that is American innovation. We have also seen the benefits of this approach as the relief provided from these burdensome regulations has been accompanied by a multitude of environmental wins. I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a release detailing these clean environmental actions.
Without objection, so ordered.
Administrator Zeldin, how has streamlining the EPA's workforce and creating a more efficient agency helped you better accomplish your mission of protecting human health and the environment simultaneously?
One of the beauties of how we've approached this process is that we solicited feedback from people who had been inside of the agency for a very long time, inside of each of the program offices, and we asked them, what do you need in order to be able to do your job better? With regards to all statutory obligations, we inherited so many backlogs. The pesticides review was something like 14,000. New chemical review, several hundred. State implementation plan backlog. Small refinery exemption backlog. And the list goes on. All these backlogs we inherited. We show up on day one. It's like, hey, here you go. That's okay. We don't mind getting a big mess to fix. We're happy to do it. So what happens when we have this 14,000 pesticide review backlog or a 500 or so new chemical backlog? How do we fix it? So we go to the Office of Chemicals, and I speak not just to the political staff, speak to the career staff. What do you need? There's primarily two needs. One is they could use more scientists. Great, that's part of the reorg. We get them more scientists. And two, they need help in updating their infrastructure. Now, Congress helped with that. It was part of an anomaly in a CR, $17 million to update the infrastructure. Thank you. And we're putting it to good use. And we're going to be able to get down that backlog. With the pesticide review, we've already gotten it down over 2,300 coming into this, and we're going to keep going.
Thank you for that hard work. I appreciate the EPA providing a path to regulatory relief for companies impacted by the EPA's HON rule, which imposed new regulations on ethylene oxide. As you know, ethylene oxide is critical in many sectors, including the use of sterilization of medical equipment. Over 50% of medical devices in the United States utilize ethylene oxide for that sterilization. When can we expect decisions on the requests made under the relief pathway to ensure companies are not spending millions of dollars in an effort to comply with the flawed Biden rule?
Thank you, Congressman, for raising this, and we're working to get it done this year. We're doing a lot at once, and that's okay. I know that it's a lot that's on our plate, but we're going to get it done. We've received a lot of concerns, and for sake of time, I could either go through some of them or not. It's up to you, Congressman.
Well, thank you. I look forward to that answer. Administrator Zeldin, at the start of this month, the House passed My CRA, which would overturn the EPA's rule that granted a California waiver, allowing them to more effectively utilize what consumers want. You talked about that in your statement, listening to what the consumer, what American wants. American wants to be able to choose what type of engine is under the hood of their car. Can you speak on the importance of consumer choice and how free market innovation, not unattainable government mandates, are the most effective way to lower emissions in the auto industry?
Congressman, the Trump EPA believes that if you want to go out and purchase a gas-powered vehicle, you should be able to go out and purchase a gas-powered vehicle. If you want to go out and purchase an electric vehicle, you should go out and be able to purchase an electric vehicle. Consumer choice is very important. The ranking member of the full committee made a reference to clean energy without referencing baseload power and the need for it, as if wind, an intermittent source, is going to be a substitute for all of these forms of baseload power. So consumer choice is important, and being realistic is incredibly important. Common sense is something the American public demands.
Thank you. My time has expired. Thank you for the realistic, common sense approach that you are directing the EPA. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator. Illinois has about 1 million lead pipes, and these are very dangerous for our communities. It's the second highest number of lead pipes in the nation, and it presents a real threat to our children at school, our families, our businesses, and we need help. And it seems to me that the EPA, who has cut a lot of money out of things that could go to addressing the lead pipe issue, and I would hope that when you think about what that really means, we're talking about very dangerous chemicals that then get in the water, that get in our children. And I am asking you, if you think this is a serious issue, and if there is a way that the Environmental Protection Agency would take a sense of responsibility and help us in our state the second highest in the country of lead pipes, to help us create more safety for our community, for all aspects of our communities. We need you to take some responsibility with us. We're not asking just for a handout. We're doing work ourselves. But isn't there some way that this would be a priority for the Environmental Protection Agency?
Yeah, Congresswoman, it's an important issue, and EPA fulfills all of our statutory obligations. If there's a desire of Congress to create a new statutory obligation from EPA, we'll make sure that we get it done. We do offer technical assistance to states on this, and we also are working with states as it relates to lead replacement.
Well, with that then, I'm going to keep your word, I know, and come back to you and talk about what you can do to make sure that all the families and the children and the businesses that are suffering now, I look forward to working with you on that. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize the Gentlelady of Florida, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to you, sir. We appreciate you being with us today. I would like to start by acknowledging that we appreciate your commitment to returning the EPA to its intended and appropriate mission. You touched on something just a few moments ago that is so important, and that is that we can both protect the environment and grow the economy simultaneously. So your commitment and your vision that the EPA needs to get back to that function and focus on finding efficiencies, whether it relates to permitting, application review, or any of the other compliance standards that have operated as an inhibition to productivity and economic growth, that you're committed to doing that responsibly is very important. Among other things, you have emphasized a return to the EPA's core statutory responsibilities. Basing regulatory decisions on sound science is essential, whether the issue is air, water, or chemicals. We have seen repeated reliance on the Integrated Risk Information System, or IRIS, a program that was not authorized by Congress and has long been criticized for a lack of transparency and scientific rigor. Can you speak to how you intend to restore confidence in EPA chemical assessments and ensure greater transparency for those who are engaging with the agency?
For number one, it's important to follow the science, to follow sound science, to consider all science in making the best decision possible.
Now, one thing you touched on a moment ago that I think is really important, on the subject of powering the great American comeback and the 5 pillars, the American energy dominance, you referenced not just permitting reform, but that one essential component of that was interagency coordination, so that people who are engaged in that process don't go through years of review only to then get to the end and encounter a different government agency. Share with us a little bit more about how you're working on that and why you think it's important.
There are equities that different agencies have in a permitting process, and it would be a much better idea going forward when Congress is considering possible ways to do it legislatively, or agencies are figuring out ways to do it in the meantime, to work with those who are applying for the permit in a simultaneous, efficient process. I've heard from members of Congress where there's a company over in Europe that does 70% of their business in China, and they want to bring a multi-billion-dollar investment into the United States. But the reason why they're not going into that state here in the US is because they feel like it'll take too much time, that years down the road, and after they spend a fortune, they may still not get an approval at the end of the process. And if there's more certainty, less time, less cost, that decision for that business in Europe will be to come to bring their dollars here. It doesn't make sense to me that 20 months down the road, out of nowhere, Fish and Wildlife might be giving them a complaint of something that they need to deal with that you could have just told them a year and a half earlier. And the same thing on EPA's front. If there's any EPA equity in a permitting reform where we need an applicant to do something, we don't want to wait 2 years down the road and then gum up the works. Just be forthcoming with those applying for the permit out of the gate and let them know what EPA is going to need so that they can address it. And that's what we have been doing with permit applicants all across the country since I was confirmed.
Similarly, one of the things that is of great interest to many of us here in Congress is ensuring that the United States does remain the artificial intelligence capital of the world. I would love to hear more about your perspective on how the EPA can be part of ensuring that we achieve that objective.
For one, it's going to require more baseload power. What's interesting, when I was going through the confirmation process, meeting with Senate EPW Republicans and Democrats, everyone was agreeing that we need to make America the AI capital of the world. And at least privately, everybody was agreeing that we're going to need more power in order to be able to do that. And I think that there is room here for Congress and for the administration to heed the call of the American public to help get that investment to win this race. And there are some people who might be your constituents, might be a bit spooked by how powerful AI is and what it might become. But if we don't lean into it, we're going to lose, and China will eat our lunch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Peters, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Administrator, for being here. I'm going to begin with a thank you because I represent San Diego, and I want to just thank you for your recent visit to the South Bay and for your work, your tour of the Tijuana Valley International Wastewater Treatment Plant. That contamination issue remains what I believe is one of the catastrophes environmentally of the hemisphere. And we were so encouraged by your commitment to working on a 100% solution. Even today, I got your release as if it was written for me, that you're advancing the timeline to get to 35 MGD, million gallons a day, within 100 days. And I can't say anything but thank you to that. That's really a welcome thing. We've all worked really hard to get resources here, Republicans and Democrats. Democrats were all committed, but I'll tell you, some of my best advocates were the 7 Republican Navy SEALs who had to train in that water. So again, thank you very much. You have a partner here, and we're happy to have a partner with you. I will say, I appreciate the need for energy here, and I know that maybe Secretary Wright more than you, but I would just say I think that's all of the above energy. I don't think it's just oil and gas to achieve American energy dominance. And to the extent we do permit reform, which I'm very interested in, I hope we're talking about all kinds of energy, and we're not selecting out some things for fast tracking and other things for slow tracking. I don't think that's what industry wants. I don't think that serves the country. But I want to talk to you about something along those lines that I hope we can agree on, and that's methane. We had, in 2016, President Obama issued administrative rules to limit fugitive methane emissions. The Trump administration repealed them, the first Trump administration. The Biden administration issued new rules to limit methane emissions, and now we're looking at a repeal or partial repeal or a total relook. And I would just suggest to you that that's not good for the environment and it's not good for business. What we're hearing from industry actually is they wanted a partial reconsideration of the methane rules that would preserve the majority of the rule structure. And either places like Exxon, Total Energy, Cheniere, AXPC, which represents 60% of U.S. production of oil and gas, they want strong rules on methane, and they want bipartisan and durable regulation. I think we have to do that with Congress, because when the Trump administration leaves, you're going to have potentially another administration that takes a whole different tack. And what we're hearing again and again is these producers need certainty. And I know you worked here. I know how frustrated you must have been from time to time when you couldn't get engagement from the administration on working out a rule. So I would suggest to you that if we could come up with a rule that regulated emissions, it could be emission-specific, not technology directive, which the last 2 Democratic administrations put out there. Let industry figure out how to achieve an emissions target, give them an emissions target, give folks who have a hard time to comply assistance. We tried to do that in the IRA. Give enough time to do it, but put enforceability in so that everybody's in the tent.
I think we could come up with something that both protects the environment to the extent we're using oil and gas, but also helps business achieve what you say, unleash energy abundance or dominance, because they can't do that without certainty. Is that something that you think we could work together on? And I would just hope that we could do that together.
Yeah, Congressman, I would be happy to sit down with you and to be able to hear your concerns and requests. We're at an early stage of the process that will include a public comment period. As we're going through the rulemaking, I have not prejudged outcomes of that rulemaking. If you'd like to sit down at this early part of that reconsideration, I'd love to do it.
Well, here's the advantage of legislation, is we don't have to go through that. We could come up with a deal within 30 days and put it into legislation and not have to go through the rulemaking process that takes so long. And I would just say, too, that to the extent you're going to, I think you suggested you're going to wholly reconsider the methane rules, Quad-O and Subpart W, industry has no idea what that entails, and then there's even more uncertainty. And they've invested billions of dollars in compliance. And when Exxon tells you, hey, leave the rules in place, we'd rather have the rules than have you repeal the rules and jerk us back and forth again. And this is on both parties. Maybe it's better for us to do that here without the incredible drag of the regulatory process, which again can be reversed by the next administration. So I'd suggest if you want to do the rulemaking, that's fine, but simultaneously, why don't we see if we can't come up with a deal that this committee could put before the full committee and then on the president's desk? Are we willing to work on that?
As far as the legislation piece, I'm happy to work with the committee to the extent that they're asking for any technical assistance or answers. From the regulatory standpoint, that's where the agency has the lead. As far as legislation crafting, that's something for you all to let me know if there's any way I can assist.
We love your help. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the vice chairman of this subcommittee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this important hearing. And most of all, thank you to you, Administrator Zeldin. It's good to see you in this position. I can't express my appreciation for, I think, bringing this agency back to a sense of pragmatism and away from ideological endeavors. And because I think we all want clean air, we want clean water, and we care about the environment. We care about being good stewards of the environment. And I look forward to working with you more on getting us back on track. One question I have for you, important to my district, being my district being the hub of many energy companies, but also many chemical companies and chemicals. The word chemical even seems to have a bad connotation to it these days, but it's vital for our modern way of life. We're coming up on review of the Toxic Substance Control Act, TSCA. What actions is the agency taking to address this backlog for reviewing the backlog that we're reviewing under Section 5 of TSCA? What actions is the agency taking to address that backlog and fulfill the obligations to review new chemical applications within 90 days? This is something that hasn't happened under the last administration.
Congressman, there are two key aspects of how we've attacked this. One, on the personnel side, we want to and are adding more scientists towards this effort. There's an ability to get through more of the backlog if we can increase the bandwidth inside of that office. And the second piece of it is with technology. It is outdated technology. There's a lot of new technology, including AI, that we are able to successfully tap into. You add those pieces, the expanded bandwidth of personnel plus the advancements in technology, and we're confident that we're going to be able to tackle the backlogs that we inherited.
I'm glad to hear it's a priority. Again, these companies need some consistency and some understanding of what kind of timelines they can adhere to. Related to that question, I think in the past we've seen some unreasonable assumptions while conducting risk evaluations under Section 6 of TSCA. So that includes failing to differentiate between different conditions of use for chemicals, assuming workers don't have appropriate personal protective equipment, making very, very outlandish assumptions in order to deny certain chemicals. And, despite existing regulations from the Occupational Safety and Hazards Administration, OSHA, that require PPE. So they would assume that, this chemical is unsafe because, well, what if somebody just drank it? Well, I mean, that's an unreasonable assumption. So what steps is the EPA now taking to ensure that these risk evaluations for existing chemicals follow the best available science, properly evaluate risks, and I think just take common sense into account?
We have to make sure that the decisions are tethered to actual science, to be considering the best available science, and making sure that that process is also more efficient inside of the agency, rather than having the agency in conflict with each other, where there's different opinions and different programming offices. To have more consistency with that process is also key.
Yeah, and we'll send you some of those strange stories that we've heard too, or just common sense was thrown out the window, and I think you'd be surprised by it. Thank you for taking that on. And again, as we work through the reauthorization of user fees under TSCA, are there additional implementation and challenges for the agency with TSCA and the 2016 Lautenberg Amendment that the committee should address?
Well, I would say as far as durability goes, any type of challenges, lessons learned that you lived through in the last administration, while we're addressing it now, pendulums swing, and you can write legislation thinking about where you want this process to be, where things look 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road. If you have an opportunity to legislate a fix based off of a lesson learned, we shouldn't be inheriting backlogs when we come in. We should be using the best available science. It should be tethered to actual science. So we're fixing it right now on our own at the agency. There could be an opportunity through legislation to make sure that it's more durable with whoever would be in charge of the agency in the future.
Yeah, your feedback on that would be great. And I'm out of time. I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Barragan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is a transformative program that will leverage private capital to support community-led projects that reduce pollution, create good-paying jobs, and lower energy costs. Several organizations applied and were competitively awarded funding to deploy to these economic development projects just to have their money frozen. You, Mr. Administrator, have made several accusations at awardees of the fund and former employees at EPA. But EPA's attorneys have not presented these accusations in court. A judge in a case brought by an award recipient asked EPA's lawyer from DOJ, and I'm quoting, "Can you proffer to me the evidence of commission of a violation of federal criminal law involving fraud, conflict of interest, bribery, or gratuity violations?" And any one of those things, and the EPA lawyer responded, and I'm quoting, "I cannot, Your Honor." Just last week, the New York Times reported that the Department of Justice's investigation into the program is coming up empty as well, stating that the investigation has, quote, "so far failed to find meaningful evidence of criminality by government officials," end quote. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter a recent New York Times article entitled, "Investigators See No Criminality by EPA Officials in Case on Biden-Era Grants," as well as a transcript from the Climate United versus Citibank court hearing into the record.
And is that the full transcript?
It is.
All right, without objection, so ordered.
Okay, so I want to know what actual evidence you have of any fraud or wrongdoing, and I'm talking about actual evidence of fraud or criminality. Documents or statements, hard proof, not just theories or hunches or policy disagreements. So Administrator Zeldin, what evidence is there of any fraud or criminality, if it exists, and why have you not provided it to us or to the Department of Justice?
That's a great question, Congresswoman. So I'll start with a Biden political appointee saying, quote, "Now it's how to get the money out as fast as possible before the Trump administration comes in. It's like we're on the Titanic and we're throwing gold bars off the edge."
Okay,
June
Mr. Zeldin,
2024,
I'm going
a
to stop you
watchdog
for a
organization.
second.
Uh,
I'm going to stop you for a
Congresswoman, do you want me to
second.
go
I'm going to
through the
reclaim my
evidence or not?
time. You mentioned gold bars.
You want me to
You
go through
mentioned
the
gold
evidence?
bars. That structure, one former employee that was secretly recorded and who was not even talking about the greenhouse gas reduction fund is not evidence of fraud or wrongdoing. So do you have something else, something better than that, that's actual fraud or criminality?
So, Congresswoman, I don't know if you're going to allow me to go through the list. That's the first.
I'm talking about the
evidence. The second is,
greenhouse.
in June
I'm very
2024, a
specific.
watchdog organization revealed that David Hayes, a Biden administration climate advisor, previously on the board of the Coalition for Green Capital, rejoined the
Mr.
board
Administrator,
in
did you say the
2023.
name? Hold on, I want to clarify the name. Did you say the name Jai Weiss? Is that who we're talking about?
I did not.
What's the name you said?
David Hayes.
David Hayes. Okay, can you repeat that? I was trying to get the name.
Okay.
The name
I
David
wish you had
Hayes?
about 30 minutes for me to go through the list, but in June 2024, a watchdog organization revealed that David Hayes, a Biden administration climate advisor, previously on the board of Coalition for Green Capital, rejoined the board in 2023 while the organization was applying for greenhouse gas reduction fund, which it ultimately received. March 4th, 2025, media article identified a number of potential conflicts of interest regarding personnel at several grantees. Beth Bafford, Climate United Fund.
Mr. Zeldin, I'm gonna reclaim my time because I want to make sure that we can have a meaningful exchange about some of the things that you are citing to. You just mentioned two examples. Have you or EPA lawyers actually given that to the Corps or used that, or cited that as fraud or criminality?
Well, first off, the standard.
It's a yes or no. Have you? You're
Yes.
a lawyer.
Yes.
They have mentioned this. Which hearing was it at? Because I don't see it in the transcript that happened in the United Climate conversation. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read to you the court transcript. Can you proffer any evidence that there was illegal or evidence of abuse or fraud, that any of this was improper or unlawful? EPA lawyer, I'm certainly not suggesting any of that was illegal or improper. Okay, just yesterday, an EPA lawyer at the hearing suggested we're not accusing anybody of fraud.
Did you understand that the evidence for EPA is not to establish criminality at the agency?
Well, you're alleging criminality. You did so in a Fox News interview. You said that's what this
but do you
greenhouse
understand
reduction fund was.
in order to
You
terminate
shouldn't
a
be
grant-
doing that if you cannot pro-offer the evidence.
But Congresswoman,
This is not Fox News. We're not going to just allow you to just
Congresswoman,
make allegations here without that evidence.
well, if this isn't a media interview, you should allow me to go through the entire list rather than just going through.
Well,
two. If
unfortunately,
you're
I only
truly
have 5
interested-
minutes, and I don't have time for
If
you to
you're truly
filibuster.
interested in the
I'm
entire
asking
list
for very
of all the
specific
evidence, then
fraud.
stop cutting me off and allow me
Chairman.
to get through the list.
Genlady's time has expired. Genlady yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Administrator, for being here. We are really glad to see you, and thank you, and we're just delighted to have you in the position you're in, my friend. I want to briefly mention a company in my district, Carbonade USA, a company I've met with that is on the cutting edge of turning carbon waste and PFAS into usable products, getting them out of our environment and into products such as sustainable aviation fuel. Administrator, I personally delivered a letter to you and from this company and with some questions surrounding EPA policies on PFAS, coal ash, et cetera. Can you commit, please, that you'll take a look at this letter?
Yes, Congressman.
Thank you very much. And thank you, and now moving on. Under the Biden administration, the EPA received over $100 billion in new supplemental funding through the IIJA and the IRA, the largest investment in the agency's history. The funding created or greatly expanded, one or the other, programs such as environmental justice grants under the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, an office that was immediately tasked with managing over $3 billion grant portfolio. In 2023, EPA Inspector General Sean O'Donnell testified here that the newly created office could be at particular risk for misspent funds and that the IRA did not allocate sufficient oversight funding. Thankfully, President Trump and yourself are hard at work clawing back funding and exposing waste, fraud, and abuse in the system. We cannot thank you enough for this, and the American people cannot thank you enough for this. We're all taxpayers, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on. Clawing back this waste, fraud, and abuse is important to all of us. We've received pushback regarding EPA's right to terminate many of the grants awarded under the previous administration, particularly under environmental justice programs funded by the IRA. Again, I know that litigation about these decisions is ongoing, but is there anything you'd like to clarify or share with Congress at this point on your understanding of EPA's authority to terminate these awards?
We refuse to waste a penny of tax dollars. We are going to ensure that the zero tolerance policy is implemented. For some of the grants that have been terminated, it's important to note, as I stated earlier, that we're in the middle of a fiscal year. So as Congress has appropriated top-line numbers for different programs, EPA will fulfill our obligations under the law in making sure that money goes out that has to go out, unless we hear otherwise from Congress as we're going through that fiscal year. But one thing that we have zero tolerance for is that there will be zero waste and abuse of even a penny of your constituents' tax dollars.
Not only do I applaud you for that, Administrator, but I commit to you that we will back you up in every way we can in that effort. So thank you for that. As you know, members of this committee have expressed serious concerns about the previous administration's attempts to stand up the greenhouse gas reduction fund, such as giving billions of dollars to organizations led by Democratic political allies to further hand out as they see fit. Initially, the previous administration also decided to use a financial agent to hold these funds, something that EPA's never done before. To your knowledge, has that been done before?
EPA has never done that before.
Has the way the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund programs been executed or structured made it more difficult to investigate these programs or to monitor the use of the funds in these programs?
Absolutely. $20 billion sent to the bank to give to 8 pass-through entities. Many of those entities were brand new. In one case, Power Forward Communities, for example, received $100 in 2023. They got $2 billion in 2024. In fact, EPA decided to put into the grant agreement that they would have 90 days to complete a training called How to Develop a Budget. EPA, the Biden EPA, felt like the recipient needed to complete a training on how to develop a budget. 90 days to complete the training, yet they could start spending the $2 billion as that timeline was going on, even before they've learned how to develop a budget. Intentionally reduced oversight in the way that the financial agent agreement was drafted, the grant agreement, the account control agreement, and when the money goes through the first pass-through, in many respects, it goes through other pass-throughs. And EPA isn't even a party to any of those sub-grantees. So we're just starting to scratch the surface. There was a congresswoman who just asked the question, said, what evidence do you have? So we started going through the list, and they didn't want, I guess the other side of the aisle doesn't want me to go into any real list. 1, 2, 3, 4, do you want me, I mean, how much time do you have? Because if you want to yield a full 20 minutes, I'm happy to go through all of the specifics, and we're right here going through more, and I'm appreciating you asking, Congressman.
Well, thank you again, Administrator, for being here today, and thank you for your work, and know that the American people support you and appreciate all of your efforts at the EPA. Thank you, my friend, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Soto, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. You know, the Energy Star program is a popular program. It's there to make sure that we have energy efficiency certifications for dishwashers, for refrigerators, dryers, and home appliances. It's been around since 1992. You and I are in our mid-40s, so you were probably an early teenager in Long Island when this was coming out, and a lot of our parents over the years were able to buy those appliances, and then now we get to do that. It saved about 5 trillion in kilowatt hours of electricity, about 500 billion in energy costs, and achieved 4 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas reductions. This is merely providing info for consumers and encourages innovation, but it's not a mandate, right? And I've read some articles from the New York Times and others that the EPA plans to shut down this program. Is this true? Is it your intention to ask Congress to shut down this program?
Well, Congress never created the program. So as far as the future of the program, I start thinking of a program like LEADS, and there's other examples of programs that are run outside of government. This program is an example of one that can be run outside of the government. And I've actually had multiple entities reach out to EPA over the course of the last few weeks because they want to take over Energy Star, which is a program that requires a big staff, a big taxpayer-funded staff, and a whole lot of tax dollars, a lot of tax dollars.
Mr. Secretary, have you proposed any rulemaking to try to adjust this program yet? Or do you have any drafts of that, of what your proposal would look like?
It doesn't require rulemaking.
Okay, so you believe you could do it just by an administrative order then?
Yeah, again, this is not a statutory obligation set by Congress.
And then, you served here for 8 years in Congress, a lawyer. You know this place really well. So when we're talking about funds like the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, let's take you at your word. Let's say there are programs and funds that you want to claw back to examine and look at to make sure that tax dollars are being spent well. There's a distinct possibility those programs are going to be around for the next couple of years and not actually pulled out under this reconciliation package. So I'm trying to understand, what do you think the full extent of your power is to pull these back before it becomes impoundment, before it becomes unlawful? Can you give this committee some idea of what you intend over this next couple months to a year? When does it become impoundment and unlawful versus reviewing programs that have already been funded by Congress?
There are programs appropriated by Congress. We're in the middle of the fiscal year, and we are going to get money out that we are required to get out.
And so, and you understand you have the power to be able to propose a budget, right? And if you want to cut programs, isn't that the proper way to do that, to in your skinny budget and then in other budgets like you had proposed initially, a 55% cut in the EPA budget? Isn't that the proper way to try to cut programs as you're reviewing to make sure money's being spent well?
Well, if we're here talking about the FY 2026 budget. If it's something with regards to the current fiscal year, it wouldn't be part of the skinny budget for next year.
I understand, but we're talking about, I'm trying to understand your
In that
role as
case-
you see it as Secretary, of where you can work with Congress on this rather than doing things unilaterally, which you know from being here for many years is not the way we're supposed to do things. You're a member of the Climate Solutions Caucus when you were here in Congress, and that was a bipartisan group that came together to try to develop bipartisan ways to deal with climate change. So I just want to make sure we're still on the same page here. Do you believe that climate change exists and that it's human caused and that we have some obligation to do some things about it in a bipartisan fashion?
Humans have contributed to it, but humans are not the only cause of it. Climate change has been around for a very long time, including pre-industrialization. You could go back looking thousands, tens of thousands of years, and you'll have the Earth at different temperatures.
I understand, Mr. Secretary. So do we have an obligation to do something about the human caused parts of it that you just recognized occurs?
I think that there are individual responsibilities and collective responsibilities to be good stewards of the environment.
And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, it's nice to see you again. Glad to hear you got accolades for being a very well-versed lawyer and having spent 8 years here. I'm surprised you would even set foot on this place again. But listen, if you'd like, Mr. Administrator, I can give you time to go back through that list where she was asking actually for some of those. Would you like to reiterate those for us?
Sure. Thank you, Congressman. And this is one of the things that might not come as a shocker to you, but not everything the New York Times says is always true.
Say it isn't so.
So, we've seen from New York Times, Washington Post, Politico, they'll write a story and they'll say that there's no evidence of any wrongdoing, anything wrong with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. No evidence. We've expressed concern with regards to self-dealing and conflicts of interest, unqualified recipients, and reduced oversight. I started to get into some of the examples of the self-dealing and conflicts of interest, which, by the way, the list is long, of the leadership of a lot of these NGOs as former Biden and Obama officials, including prominent Democratic donors. We have individuals who are serving in leadership capacities helping to create these programs, giving it to their former employers in some of the examples. A government reviewer for Justice Climate Fund awarded $940 million noted that only 3 of the nonprofit's 12 board members are independent from the organization and its coalition members. No mention of conflict of interest, like if a family member benefited from an entity receiving greenhouse gas reduction funding through the JCF. Unqualified recipients, Power Forward communities had reported a total of $100. Even in 2023, they get $2 billion in 2024. CGC expended only $1.42 million in 2023 before receiving a $5 billion award. Earlier, we were talking to the chairman about Appalachian Community Capital receiving $500 million, and they never managed anywhere near that much money. Concerns about the lack of oversight. You can ask me all sorts of basic questions about where the money goes. Once it goes to those 8 prime recipients, that I should have an answer, but we don't. As was pointed out with one of your colleagues, this is the first time that EPA is using a financial agent agreement in connection with one of these, with one of these programs. The first time, actually, that it was ever used as a non-exchange grant program administered by the federal government across all agencies. Last-minute modifications to the grant agreement in ACA appeared intentional to reduce oversight, including amending the account control agreement January 13th of 2025, just 1 week before the inauguration. Those amendments limited EPA's contractual rights to terminate for misconduct short of a federal crime, and limited EPA's contractual rights to assert exclusive control over funds in the Citibank accounts. EPA determined that the amendments left EPA with insufficient authority to retain control of funds short of outright termination. Former EPA IG testifying to this subcommittee says the EPA's, quote, pace of spending GGRF funds escalates not only the risk for fraud, but also the urgency for oversight. He said that the EPA's OIG would need to hire oversight professionals with specialized expertise to conduct sufficient oversight regarding the NCIF grants in particular, not only to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse, but also to ensure that the IRA funds deliver the real environmental and human health benefits the public is paying for. EPA's acting IG, Nicole Murley, testified to the House Subcommittee of Oversight and Investigations. The EPA was particularly concerned that GGRF program, including because the grant structure makes providing effective oversight challenging, and that EPA is concerned that there will be critical gaps in monitoring, accountability, and compliance in the GGRF. Now here's the thing, we're just scratching the surface, and I see your time is now running short, and I appreciate you allowing me to spend many minutes, but here's the catch. If you had 20 minutes that you were yielding to me right now, I would just keep going through the list. And no matter how much further down that list we get, the New York Times and the Washington Post and congressional Democrats will dig in even deeper, saying there's no evidence of anything. The more time that y'all give me to go further down the list, the more dug-in Democrats will say, with their hands in their ears, saying there's no evidence of any misconduct. There's no evidence of any way that there's anything wrong with any of this. But we have a zero-tolerance policy for any waste and abuse, and we're not going to apologize.
Gentleman's time.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so the sky is falling, so we appreciate you, Administrator.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Auchincloss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome back, Administrator. I want to talk about PFAS. When you were a member here, you were on the PFAS Action Force, yes? And I believe you voted for PFAS legislation, yes?
Yes.
My inclination is to think that's because you represented New York, and like Massachusetts, which I represent, both states have a pretty significant PFAS challenge, contaminated soil, contaminated water. You have a contaminated DOD site in Calverton, right? in your former district, which I know you advocated for and advocated to reduce PFAS levels there. So I was hopeful and remain hopeful that you can be a partner on PFAS remediation as administrator. Last week, you announced that the EPA would rescind the drinking water standard for 4 PFAS chemicals and extend the compliance deadline for PFOA and PFOS by an additional 2 years, giving water systems 7 years to comply. I know you had indicated in previous testimony that for those 2, that for PFOA and PFOS, you may actually consider lowering it from 4 to 2 parts per trillion, yes?
For PFOA and PFOS, we're maintaining the 4 parts per trillion MCL.
So you won't consider lowering it to 2?
With regards to the other 4, we're going to be going through a rulemaking where at the end of that process, that number will be determined. It could be,
Right,
could be
but
4, it could be 2, it could be something else.
Not the other 4. I'm talking about the 2, PFOA and PFOS. I'm just asking because you had said in previous testimony you could potentially bring it down to 2, but it sounds like you're going to keep it at 4. Okay, extending the timeline to 7 years. So now let's talk about the other 4 PFAS chemicals: PFHXS, PFNA, HFPODA, and then the hazard index mixture. So the EPA has its own science, as well as up-to-date peer-reviewed science that says that these 4 PFAS have been linked to serious human health harms, even at very low levels. Why, instead of just retaining the MCLs for those 4 PFAS in accordance with the no backsliding provision, why would you just rescind it?
One of the things that I understand as administrator of EPA is that every single decision that I will ever make, I'll probably get sued for, whether I say yes or no on anything. I have inherited some litigation as well, including litigation on that rule that was finalized before I got there. There was a procedural error in the way in which they moved through the process on those 4. I inherited that procedural error, and I'm going to fix it.
All right, so just reclaiming my time then. So you're not contesting that there is good science that those 4 PFAS that you rescinded the rule for have been linked to serious human health harms. What you are asserting is that there are a procedural error under the APA?
Yes.
Under the APA, that means that you have to rescind, but you are committing that you are going to reissue a rule for those 4 PFAS.
We are going to go through the rulemaking process on those 4.
I see. Okay. Moving towards the budgeting aspect of this, the skinny budget proposal has a 90% reduction for the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. Is that accurate?
Yes.
How is New York and the 1.3 million New Yorkers who have PFAS in their water above the MCLs by the former rule, how are they going to get water treatment plants with a 90% cut? That's the primary funding mechanism for water infrastructure.
So great news, and it's something that members of Congress who care about this issue would be very happy to hear. I would say the right word would be inundated of how much outreach I've received over the course of the last few months from companies that have acquired new technology that they're very proud of in ways to far, far more efficiently than ever before be able to remove PFAS.
Can you name those new
water
technologies? Because I've been doing this research as well, and all of it costs money. So you're talking about like carbon filters, you're talking about electrochemical.
The names of the companies, and I'm happy to share with this committee the names of whoever has reached out to.
Just give me a broad sense, just like the technology broadly. Like, give me an example of a technology that's going to be cheaper, faster, better, that's not going to require money to update the water treatment facilities.
It's going to cause it would require a small fraction, but we are in the process. I'm not going to start.
Can you name a technology though?
What's that?
Just the technology broadly.
Yeah. So these are ideas that are being pitched that we're vetting right now, and I'm not going to endorse any of it. But I was say that it's important.
You don't have to
for
endorse
us
it.
And the agency.
Just name a technology that you've heard about.
It is a treatment that breaks down the forever chemical so that it's no longer a forever chemical. It is a treatment of the water that breaks down the chemical.
If you're talking about electrochemical oxidation, you can do that for the very, very condensed landfill, but you can't do that at the scale of municipal water treatment facilities. It's way too diffuse. If that's what you're talking about, that is not the answer, which is why I'm asking about other technologies which you don't seem to be able to name. I'm going to yield back my time.
Now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Mr. Guthrie, 5 minutes question.
Thank you. Thank you, Administrator Zeldin. Thanks for being back here amongst your colleagues. We welcome you back here to Capitol Hill, and so happy you're in the position you are. Last night, you talked about new technologies moving forward. Last night, we had a rule, our Congressional Review Act, I defended before rules, and it was if you're a major source and you had new technology or new operation procedures that lowered your standard, your emissions, then you could go into the area source, and we were accused of doing everything of giving kids asthma and things like that, which is unfortunate, because what we want to do is we see new technology coming, and we see the opportunities for people to improve, and that's what we want. And I went to college in your home state and right down the river from the ranking member. And when I was in the Hudson River in the 1980s, you couldn't swim in it, at least even around 50 miles up from Manhattan and at West Point, because it was contaminated. And the first time I remember hearing of the HHS secretary, of course I'd heard of his family, was he was the leader of Clean Up the Hudson River, the River Keepers, which was a group that I kind of follow because I was dismayed that such a beautiful piece of our country was in the position it was in because of industry. And we all agree, and there's nobody saying anywhere on our side of the aisle, and you're in the administration, that those types of things absolutely cannot happen. And so we're all there. But so now we're getting on to things you're trying to fix, where the small regulatory, it seems like small regulatory, they cost a fortune, that you were talking about with PFAS and some other things we're seeing with our water plants. But getting back to the greenhouse gas fund, could you kind of walk us through again? There was at least one, if not many, nonprofit that essentially was formed after the IRA, had $100 in his checking account, got $2 billion grant. So it seems like here's the money, go form your thing and get it, instead of trying to invest. They talk about investing in known technologies to improve the environment. People were creating businesses who were politically connected to chase the money. Could you talk, you said if you had 20 minutes, you have like 2:45 if you want to talk more about it.
Great. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to continue to go through the list, and I would encourage anyone at home who doesn't want to hear it to put their finger in their ear, because we'll keep going through specific examples that the New York Times says doesn't exist. An EPA panel, this is the Biden EPA. The Biden EPA panel reviewing the application for Power Forward communities, that's the one that you referenced. They received $100 in 2023, and then they get $2 billion in 2024. The Biden EPA panel was questioning the salaries it planned to pay its executives, the salary structure for top officers. This is a quote from the Biden EPA. The salary structure for top officers seems high for a nonprofit, wondering if this could be a problem with public perception, the reviewer noted. Another comment on a part of Power Forward Communities.
I hate to interrupt you, Administrator. Do you know what the top salary was?
Thank you for asking. Another comment, which was part of the application, a reviewer writes, quote, "For such an important section, it was pithy, though not always in a good way. Many of the costs were just presented, but little or no explanation as to why they are reasonable. I would have preferred they omitted the travel discussion, explained why they need to pay the CEO $800,000, growing to $948,000 in year 7, and Chief Operations Officer $455,000 per year. It was reported that 22 of Power Forward Communities employees were slated to earn more than $150,000. Reviewers also criticized Power Forward Communities for, by this is the Biden EPA. Biden EPA criticized Power Forward Communities for its lack of planning for, quote, proactive oversight. So the Biden EPA is giving this entity that made $100 in 2023, $2 billion in 2024, and the Biden EPA is concerned that this entity isn't going to be able to conduct proper oversight. That's just an example of going down the list a bit more on one of the 8 NGOs.
So the group didn't exist. They came into being in 2023, had $100 in their checking account, gets a $2 billion grant, and the CEO gets almost $900,000. And over a year, will get over $900,000.
Yes, Chairman.
That's what your testimony is today.
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you. We only have about 6 seconds left, so I will yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Administrator, for being here. I represent the state of Louisiana, a state that knows intimately the cost of inaction and indifference when it comes to environmental protection. In Louisiana, the environment is not some abstract policy issue. It's a matter of life and death, survival and displacement, health and chronic illness. You mentioned in your opening statement, or in one of your statements, and I really appreciate it, I want to zero in on the fact that you said that you believe in coexistence and ensuring that industry and healthy communities are able to work together. It's a message that I often send. But I also add to that the importance of making sure for industry to ever survive, you have to have healthy communities. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
We have to make sure that individuals have clean water, clean air, and they're being listened to because they're the ones who are frontline. Would you agree with that as well?
Of course.
In the past few years, under the previous administration, the previous administrator took my invitation seriously and visited with me in Louisiana to meet with industry and individuals, to meet with people like Rise St. James, to meet with people like the Bucket Brigade, to meet with communities like the Concerned Citizens for a Better St. John, and industry as well. Sir, would you be willing to accept such an invitation to work closely, to listen, and to be a part of solutions?
I love any good excuse to come to Louisiana.
I'll take you up on it. We got lots more too, so thank you very much. That's important because we need to demonstrate not just in word, but also in deed, that coexistence begins with and is paramount with having safe communities, because industry can't survive if it doesn't have people to work in these facilities. So I thank you for that. I want to jump to let's talk a little bit about resilience and disaster preparedness, specifically the grants your agency canceled that were designed to increase in my district's resiliency, flooding, and extreme heat. One such was the community organization Stay Ready NOLA for creating a solar-powered resilience facility in New Orleans to house linemen and other first responders in the aftermath of hurricanes. It would also provide the surrounding communities with a safe place to cool off, charge their phones, and receive supplies. This project is direct response to lessons learned from Hurricane Ida in 2021, where parts of my district lost power for several weeks. The deaths that occurred from Hurricane Ida were not just because of flooding or storm surge, but the elderly and sick residents overheating without power, without air conditioning during these scorching summer days in following the storm. Stay Ready NOLA Executive Director Neil Morris is here today. I want to take a moment to recognize him and the incredible work that he does in our community to build this vital facility. When these grants were pulled, you didn't just cancel paperwork, you undermined life-saving mitigation efforts in vulnerable communities. Dillard University is another one of those perfect examples of an HBCU that had funding to retrofit its facilities to serve as community resilience hubs during emergencies, was also terminated. Mr. Administrator, do you commit to restoring these grants after review?
That commitment I'm not going to make. However, I'm happy to work with you to be able to identify any portion of the grant where there would be alignment with the administration. We can work together, our teams can work together. As far as the entire grant, one of the differences of opinion in administration priorities and policies from the Biden administration to the Trump administration is that we believe that money should get spent, if there's $1 to get spent in the name of remediating an environmental issue, the dollar should get spent on directly remediating the environmental issue, not giving money to...
I hate to cut you off. I got 36 seconds. Sure. I want to ask you one final question. Your office's termination letter to Stay Ready NOLA in their project to build a hub for first responders stated, the objectives of the awards are no longer consistent with EPA funding priorities. How is assisting linemen and others providing life-saving services in the aftermath of a natural disaster no longer consistent with your agency's priority?
So the difference is that at the Trump EPA, we do not agree with spending the money by giving it a pass-through grant to an entity where even a portion of the funding is used to prop up an NGO as opposed to spending it on directly remediating an environmental issue. So again, happy to sit down with you. I know that there are a number of grants.
Yes, sir.
On top of just the two that you referenced inside of your district. I'm happy to go through the entire list with you.
I would love to visit with you. Thank you for being here today, and I'm going to accept your offer to come to Louisiana to visit with these stakeholders, to talk about these individual grants, whether it's Dillard University or any other that's out there that have been so critically important to the people of Louisiana, both Republican, Democrat, and the like. Environmental issues, environmental justice, environmental concerns don't have color, don't have race, don't have party. They only have people. So thank you very much, and my time is up, and I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentlelady from Iowa, Ms. Miller Meeks, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Guthrie and Ranking Member Tonko, for holding this important hearing today. And I also want to thank Administrator Zeldin for appearing before the subcommittee. Wonderful to see you again, sir. The EPA under past administrations took a one-size-fits-all approach that buried farmers, energy producers, and small businesses in red tape. The result was not necessarily better environmental outcomes, but delayed projects, increased costs for consumers, and real harm to rural communities like those in Iowa. This administration has rightly set a new tone, focused on cutting unnecessary regulations, streamlining permitting processes, and rolling back out-of-touch, impractical, unworkable, and expensive climate mandates that ignored energy demand and local economic realities. As we consider the EPA's budget, I want to see a shift in focus, fewer dollars spent on expanding federal control and more on empowering local solutions, science-based policy, and regulatory certainty. That's how we deliver real environmental progress without sacrificing economic opportunity. Your Powering the Great American Comeback initiative emphasizes permitting reform as a key pillar. Given the lengthy environmental reviews that have delayed critical infrastructure projects across the country, what specific steps is the EPA taking to streamline permitting processes while maintaining appropriate environmental safeguards?
There are some in government who are trying to get to the answer of no, looking for any excuse to say no and to gum up the works. We want to be able to get to yes. We want to be able to work with people and companies out there that want to invest in communities, that want to invest in the American economy. Right now, for example, in Arizona, Taiwan Semiconductors are trying to get a permit through to make a major investment inside of Maricopa County. When I meet with elected officials in Arizona, ranging from the Democrat governor or the two Democratic senators or Republican members of the House, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, their ask of EPA is that we work with them and TSMC to try to get that approval done as quickly as possible. And there are so many examples all across the entire map where there were applications that were stalled that we've been able to implement permitting reform without waiting for a bill from Congress to just do it ourselves. Where we were gumming up the works, we are no longer gumming up the works.
Thank you. Biofuel production helps us meet our growing energy needs, supports our farmers, and it creates, most importantly, American jobs with American-made energy and supports our America First agenda, helping to create manufacturing jobs that can't be offshored. The proposed 2026 Renewable Volume Obligation, or RVO rule, was due last November and just went to OMB last week. Every day of delay creates unnecessary uncertainty for Iowa's farmers, biofuel producers, and workers. Industry and ag leaders have asked for at least 5.25 billion gallons for biomass-based diesel and 15 billion gallons for ethanol. We can produce it, we can make it homegrown, and it fits in with energy dominance. When do you expect the EPA to release the proposed RVO rulemaking?
Very soon.
Great, thank you. We look forward to that. Iowa leads in E15 retail availability, yet we still face unnecessary barriers each summer due to the outdated volatility rules. Consumers lose access to lower cost, cleaner burning fuel just when gas prices rise. Can you provide a timeline for EPA's final action to ensure permanent, year-round E15 access nationwide, voluntary, and will you support this fix?
Well, Congress almost passed this last December. That is the most durable, simplest way to answer your question and to resolve it. To leave it to EPA, you have all sorts of different asks and steps in the process as you go throughout the entire year. We have made a number of decisions since I was confirmed at the end of January, heeding the asks from you and your colleagues in Congress, as well as the governors. We are currently, we're in the middle of the summer driving season where the emergency waiver that was issued before May 1st is something that we have to revisit every 3 weeks or so, and I just did that again yesterday. That process is not as simple, it's not as quick, and it's going to require more bandwidth for you, it's going to require more bandwidth for me at the agency until and unless there's any type of statutory change.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I have some questions that I'm going to submit for the record on the Clean Power Plan 2.0 and on WOTUS and small refinery exemptions that I'll be submitting for the record, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. As many others have emphasized today, the EPA's main purpose, as established by Congress, is to protect the environment and public health. Today, I want to talk to you about the importance of managing contaminated sites. As you may know, New Jersey's industrial legacy presents environmental challenges in our communities. That is why the Brownfields program is particularly important in my district. Just a few weeks ago, this committee held a bipartisan hearing on its successes, and Mayor Bolich from the city of Elizabeth testified to the program's importance. Elizabeth leveraged Brownfields funding to convert formerly contaminated sites into affordable housing and other projects that enhance community well-being and economic development. And we heard from Republican witnesses at that hearing that this program has a significant return on investment. For every federal dollar spent, there's an average $20 return in economic activity. So we're really proud of the work that Elizabeth has done, and all my colleagues here have success stories from their districts as well. So, Mr. Zeldin, yes or no, given the success of and bipartisan support for the Brownfields program, can you commit to this committee that it will not be impacted by budget cuts?
Well, I mean, ultimately, the funding level is going to be something that's decided between Congress and the administration. The Brownfields program, as you point out, is a very amazing, great, successful program that should be a source of strong bipartisan support and pride, and success stories all across America are overwhelming.
Correct. And it is a bipartisan success story that, as we heard in that hearing, so many good projects across the country. So funding's part one. Part two, again, yes or no, can you commit to me that the program staff will be maintained as it is a bipartisan priority for this committee?
You said the program staff?
That's correct.
Yeah, it is important to make sure that the Brownfields program is fully staffed to be able to extraordinarily accomplish its mission.
Okay. And while I hope that's true, I'm concerned about some recent EPA actions. My office has heard from Groundwork Elizabeth, a nonprofit promoting environmental resilience, education, and youth leadership in Elizabeth, that a $500,000 Brownfields grant was paused without clarity on when it might be reinstated. That was a job training grant to help students access stable, good-paying environmental work while also giving back to their community. And we've heard numerous stories about grant cancellations at other EPA programs, in addition to the ongoing layoffs of staff at EPA who provide technical assistance across EPA programs. So while we're addressing industrial pollution, I'd like to discuss the Superfund program. There are over 100 of those sites in New Jersey, including 6 in the district that I represent. My constituents in the Ironbound section of Newark live near a former factory that manufactured 700,000 gallons of Agent Orange and reportedly dumped bad batches directly into the Passaic River. Ensuring that sites like this one are robustly monitored, managed, and remediated is integral to the well-being of families in my district and a priority for me and the people that I represent. That's why I'm profoundly concerned that you're proposing to cut Superfund's budget by over $250 million. So my question to you is, for a family that lives in the Ironbound section in close proximity to a Superfund site, what would you say to a mother who is concerned for her family's health and well-being to justify why you're cutting funding that could protect her children from carcinogens and other health risks associated with contaminated sites?
With regards to Superfund, which is another very successful, important program, I've had the opportunity to visit Superfund sites inside of New Jersey since becoming administrator, and I look forward to coming back. Our goal is to be able to successfully delist all or parts of these sites. As it relates to your question, Congress imposed large taxes in the IIJA and the IRA to finance the Superfund program. As it says inside of the skinny budget, between these $1.6 billion in taxes estimated to be available in 2026 and litigation recoveries from responsible parties, that is why there is a need for an additional funding for the Superfund cleanup as reflected in the skinny budget.
Correct. But those funds were intended to supplement and accelerate Superfund remediation, right? Because what I always talk about is today there are families living near these Superfund sites, right? They don't have the luxury of waiting. And so we need to do this work as quickly as possible. But between the funding cuts and staffing cuts, we're concerned that the work is not going to get done in a timely manner or as fast as it could if we had a whole of government approach. And that's why I really hope that the EPA will continue to partner with Congress so we can make sure that all of our communities have the healthy outcomes that they deserve. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I thank him for being efficient with his time. We're running out of it, and I now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for 5 minutes. I will remind everybody that the witness has to leave at approximately 12:30, so we're trying to hurry through. Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Zeldin, for being here. I am, like some of my colleagues, concerned about some of the decisions that the EPA has made. But I'm looking at it from a little different perspective. For instance, there was a rule on lime dust emissions that was put forward by the EPA last summer, even though their EPA's own scientific assessment said that emissions from lime manufacturing industry were already acceptable with an ample margin of safety. This rule would impose $2 billion on the industry, which gets passed on in multiple ways. Most people think of lime in the context of the manufacture of cement products, but it's also used to enhance soil quality. There are a number of other uses for it. Administrator Zeldin, is the EPA now taking a look at some of these rules that I think have gone outside of what's necessary and imposing an unnecessary cost on our economy and on people?
Yes, Congressman. Yeah, we've received various concerns regarding niche apps, including regulations not squarely grounded in the statutory authority, compliance costly to industry, deadlines for compliance with some requirements may be too short. Some of the rules may disproportionately impact small businesses. Questions exist regarding the science underlying certain standards. Test data used in calculating standards may not fully reflect variability or real-world operations. Questions exist regarding the appropriateness of setting certain technology-based standards rather than health-based standards, and questions exist regarding the appropriateness of setting certain numeric emissions limits rather than work practice standards.
I'm glad you mentioned the technology-based standards because it's also involves the particulate matter standards. Some of the things that the EPA has imposed on people require what I jokingly refer to as black box technology. And people say, well, what's in the box? Nothing. That technology doesn't exist yet. And it poses enormous costs on the economy, but also on city governments that gets passed on to consumers. So I'm hoping that the EPA will take a more scientific approach to some of these rules, but also go back and look at the science behind some of the rules that have been imposed by the past administration and possibly consider repealing those. There's something else that I want to talk with you about that I think is really critical right now, and that is our ability to have access to rare earth elements. China controls 94% of the rare earth refining They have the largest deposit of rare earth elements in the world. The United States, I think, 7th on that list. And we're finding ourselves in a position where there's not a single major refinery for rare earth elements in the Western Hemisphere. There's only 9 in the world, 8 are in China, 1's in Malaysia. I think that we're at a point where we're going to have to look at permitting, look at the regulations in order for the United States to catch up, to secure the supply chain that we need. And there are multiple opportunities to do this. You can find rare earth elements in coal ash. You can find them in things like discarded hard drives. But we need to be able to mine, process, and refine our own rare earth element supply, because it is not just important for our economy, it's important for our national security. I like your comments on that.
Congressman, this is one of the issues that are on the plate, the priority list for the National Energy Dominance Council. EPA has some equities. The Department of Interior has equities. The Department of Energy has equities. Department of Commerce. There is an opportunity here for us to be able to not just benefit economically, but I would also look at it as a matter of national security, for us not to have to rely on other nations at a moment where it would matter most in the future, to make sure that we are prepared here domestically. So I think it is a very important priority for the National Energy Dominance Council and for the Trump administration at large.
Well, I'm very grateful to have you in the position that you're in, Administrator Zeldin. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Landsman, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to jump into waste, fraud, and abuse. Very important to you. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. The Government Accountability Office lays out a whole host of changes that would get at waste, fraud, and abuse, and I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the GAO reports for the EPA.
Do you have a date on it? Or
I think we're
for all of them.
Yeah, I think we're submitting all of the reports.
All right. If you can give me the specific reports, because I think there's thousands of GAO reports over the years on the EPA. Just give me the date, and we'll
Yeah. We'll get you the dates. We went back and forth, but I think it was
okay. That's fine. Just
no problem.
Get us the date so we can get that into the record properly without objection.
To the chair's point, there are so many. So I'm going to mention a few. Strengthen controls over the EPA administrators and associates travel. Obviously, there's the possibility. In fact, they found waste, fraud, and abuse there. Implement controls to prevent unauthorized access to the EPA facilities. Implement comprehensive fraud risk management framework. Have all of the GAO report recommendations on waste, fraud, and abuse been implemented?
The ones that you're referencing, I've had meetings on all. We've been addressing all. For example, when we're doing the COVID-era return to work, inside of our headquarters here in DC, it was easier to know who was coming into the building because they have to badge in. But in regions, there are regional offices where they didn't have to badge in, or in some cases, one person's badging in on an elevator and there's 7 other people on the elevator. So we have been working on addressing that with all of the regional offices. Travel contracts, vending, real estate consolidation.
But all the GAO report, the recommendations you have implemented, yes or no?
As the chair pointed out that there are a lot of reports. We've been implementing a ton.
It's so important to me because the GAO reports focus entirely on waste, fraud, and abuse, and it's a huge issue for you. It's a huge issue for me, and my frustration has been why the focus hasn't been at least significantly on the GAO reports. To that end, are you currently under investigation by the GAO? Is the EPA?
I'm not aware of an investigation by the GAO.
The GAO is currently investigating the EPA.
Yeah, when you say investigating, what are you referencing?
The GAO has opened up an investigation on the EPA that was public. That's my understanding. But you're saying no?
Well, no, I'm not aware of an investigation.
Okay.
By the GAO.
The $5 billion that you cut from the EPA, 55%. That is not included in GAO reporting, correct?
This is we're talking about an FY 2026 number that is now going through the legislative process. I wouldn't anticipate that would be something GAO would be looking at, but I can't speak for GAO.
Yeah. So again, the GAO focuses on waste, fraud, and abuse. The $5 billion cut in the EPA does not go under that category. We have in Southwest Ohio the second largest research and development facility. The administration has proposed cutting 75% of ORD, putting at risk about 400 jobs in our district. Would you be willing to either come to the district or sit down with me and let us make the argument to keep these jobs over the course of the next couple of weeks? I mean, it's just it's so many people.
Yeah, there is. So I have been visiting all of the regions, all of the labs. I've been to 17 states, and we're going to keep going. So are you saying that you have a lab in your district?
Yes.
Happy to come visit that lab.
Yes or no? Did the ORD play an important role in determining that the air was okay to breathe in East Palestine?
The EPA has multiple programmatic offices that would be involved.
They played a huge role. Did the ORD play a big role in Deepwater Horizon, Flint, Michigan water crisis, California water fires?
Again, we have multiple programmatic offices, and the scientific and research functions and the statutory obligations are all going to be fulfilled.
They played a huge role. Cutting ORD so significantly will be devastating. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize long-suffering gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Administrator. Congratulations. What a breath of fresh air. And to my colleague's question, will you come visit? Thank you for saying yes to whether it's the gentleman from Louisiana or any other state. We couldn't get a single visit in West Texas from the previous administrator, and we desperately needed it because of the overreach. And what you saw was the Supreme Court of the United States struck down the overreach of agencies like the previously run EPA in their Loper Bright decision that was so important when you're talking about Quad O, B, and C. And what the other side told me for 4 straight years is, oh, we're working with industry. No, there was no collaboration with industry. And I want to thank you for saying yes and agreeing to go visit a lab or whatever it is. And by the way, the money laundering scheme that we saw in the previous administration that sent $2 billion to that company, who was the CEO of that company?
Power Forward Communities, I'll get that for you.
Not meant to be a trick question. I just thought it might have been a gentlelady from Georgia.
Sure. The CEO of Power Forward Communities was Tim Myopoulos, who was also CEO of Fannie Mae during the Obama administration.
Okay. Moving to what I want to talk about, Quad O, B, and C, and the Subpart W reporting included in your 31 points. Thank you for that. We have to compete with China. We want the EPA to make sure that our environment is protected. There is no argument whatsoever there. Can you give us a status on what the Quad O series for new and existing and also the Subpart W will get to? Because this is not workable for our producers that are especially small scale.
Both reconsiderations were announced on March 12th. We will be following the Administrative Procedure Act on both, working to get this work finalized this year. It will include a public comment period. I will not prejudge outcomes of either rulemaking before, and we will follow our obligations under the law and going through that rulemaking, Congressman.
Thank you, and I'll advocate for reality. We were very pleased that Mr. Mason, the Region 6 Director, came and visited the Permian Basin, and just before your visit, I'd like to invite you again. But one of the things we talked about was, especially with regards to methane, the monitoring that is being done, and to incentivize that good behavior, we have reduced the intensity of methane in the Permian Basin by almost 30%, and that's happened in the last 10 to 15 years, while also increasing the amount of barrels produced from 1 million barrels a day back in 2010 to 6 million barrels a day. And that the complexity that goes on to reduce that intensity, we want to work with you. I encourage that work. Do you have any ideas on where the previous administrator was looking at the Permian Basin in general to place into a state of non-attainment with regards to the ozone reporting? Any updates on that for us? This was something that interjected a lot of chaos into that region.
It's a very important pillar. It's a very important pillar of the Powering the Great American Comeback Initiative to advance cooperative federalism. Part of that with the reorg is creating an office for state air partnerships inside of the Office of Air and Radiation. We have approved 25 state implementation plans, including 16 that were backlogged from the last administration. We are working through these non-attainment requests and issues, including inside the Permian Basin. We want to be a partner at EPA for Texas and the local community.
Well, thank you. It was very apparent to my constituents that the EPA had become weaponized. And working in partnership is exactly the key word. We appreciate that. And again, I'll say it very clearly, not a single person in my district wants. In fact, we are true conservationists. We've lived there for a long time. Water is something that's very important to us. I'll yield the last 30 seconds to you for any rebuttals or follow-ups that you needed to make from previous questioning.
Well, a couple days after our regional administrator, Scott Mason, was with you in your district, I was there, and I thought it was a very productive, helpful visit, meeting with the community. I think it's important for whoever is an EPA administrator to come, for them to include that as part of being familiar with how EPA regulations out of Washington, D.C. End up impacting realities on the ground. So it was an important early stop to make. I was happy to do it, and I'm grateful for your invite and Senator Cruz's invite for that trip.
Well, thank you. We want to work in partnership. We have to compete with China. We have to compete around the world, which means that we can't have a weaponized agency. Thank you for your leadership, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentlelady of North Dakota, Ms. Fedorchak, for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Zeldin, it's great to meet you and to have you here. I represent the entire state of North Dakota, and North Dakota feeds and fuels the world. And so your agency has a huge impact on the people of my state. So first, I want to say thank you for what you're doing already. One of the first actions I took in this role was to write the President and Secretary Burgum to ask them to repeal 20 burdensome rules and regulations from the previous administration. And you're well on your way to doing that. You have outlined a number of grave abuses from the last administration, and I would say one of the gravest abuses was the impact the past administration had on our power sector. I come from the regulatory side of things. I was most recently the president of the National Utility Regulators Association, and in that role, I worked hard to get the last administration to be reasonable on their 111D rules. They completely ignored everything we said. They ignored the power, the grid operators, and that rule was completely disconnected from reality. And even though it's being pulled back, it had grave consequences on our power grid. And today, we are short, or dangerously short, of having enough power to meet demand because of that agency's overreach in the last administration. So thank you for your commitment to correcting that and getting us back on track.
Congresswoman, first off, I want to congratulate you and the people of North Dakota for what was a massive upgrade in their representation here in the House. Congratulations on your election. We inherited a lot. I often get asked what the biggest surprise or what was most shocking once I was confirmed as administrator, and I would say it was surprising how much we were able to do at once. And we've heard your calls for action at the agency, and we want to tackle it all at the same time. We don't even want to pace ourselves.
Good. Couple of things. There's about 3 things I wanted to mention that are really important to my state that you're already working on. You announced last week that you proposed to approve my state's proposal to manage the coal combustion residuals permit program in lieu of federal CCR. That's a huge decision. Thank you for that. Any sense of when what the timeline will be to finalize that?
As quickly as possible, following the law. As last week's letter indicated, the application that was submitted is complete, and we're moving through that process over the course of these next couple months.
Excellent, thank you for that. The farmers across my state are really significantly impacted by waters of the U.S. In North Dakota, we have something somewhat unique. It's called the Prairie Pothole Region, and that area creates a lot of uncertainty for our farmers and producers, particularly as it relates to the kind of whiplash of changing regulations. So will you commit to working with North Dakota farmers and ranchers to make sure that your WOTUS rule rewrite accurately reflects the unique wetlands in my state?
Absolutely, Congresswoman. It's imperative that we get it right, and we don't believe it's going to be hard to get it right. We're going to follow the simple, prescriptive, straightforward decision in Sackett. We want a definition that all 50 states are able to get behind. Right now, that's not the case, and we want to make sure that everyone in your state knows whether or not what is on their land is a water of the United States subject to federal regulation or not. We want them to be able to know that without having to hire an attorney or a consultant, without having to pay somebody in order to tell that to them.
Excellent, and let's hope it's not a trickle of water that is only there at certain parts of the year. I've heard from our electric utilities throughout the state about the negative impacts of the Biden MATS rule. This regulation targets critical coal units across the country, again, threatening grid reliability, one of our most important issues that we must address. I was pleased to learn that EPA is considering a 2-year compliance exemption while you write the MATS rule. This goes at something I'm working on legislatively, that we can't be forcing generation offline at a time when demand is increasing. As you work on that rule, will you work with me in this committee to get it right?
Absolutely, Congresswoman, and it's important to note that there were mercury and air toxic standards before this most recent rule was put into place. So some people try talking about it as if this recent MATS rule, if it went away, that there's just no mercury and air toxic standards, and that's not accurate. As we go through the reconsideration, we want to get it right. We will have a public comment period. We want to work with members of Congress. We want to reach the right decision.
Excellent. Yeah, the rule had already been complied with and at great expense. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. I hope you'll come visit North Dakota this summer.
Gentlelady yields back. Now we're at wave-ons. We may have a member of the committee come back. Administrator Zeldin has indicated he will give us some additional time, but what we're going to do by agreement is we're going to have 3 minutes per person, wave on both sides, and we'll try to get through everybody with a 3-minute rule for those who've waved on. We appreciate it. Ms. Castor, Florida is now recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Administrator, to our committee. Thank you for being here. You know, working families and small business owners across the country are really facing an affordability squeeze. And I'm very concerned with actions out of EPA and others across the administration on, it's just, you've added on to their pain, and they are really feeling it in their wallets. Utility companies in at least 19 states have hiked rates as much as $40 per month just over the past few months. You know, one important way that families save money is energy efficient appliances. In my neck of the woods, families are rebuilding after Hurricanes Helene and Milton. They are replacing a lot of their appliances, and it was just so painful to hear you announce that the Energy Star, this popular program that certified energy efficiency of home appliances for more than 3 decades, was coming to an end. That distinct blue label that's recognized by Americans has just been a godsend to them. And the data shows that this voluntary program has saved $500 billion in utility bills for Americans and prevented a whole lot of pollution. So this Energy Star was codified by Congress in 2005. It is the law. So how do you justify an announcement that, how do you justify that you have the authority to end this and these important consumer savings?
Well, for one, we don't believe that that Energy Star would cease to exist if the government wasn't propping it up. There are plenty of programs outside of government. As I referenced to one of your colleagues earlier, the LEADS program is another example. Over the course of the last couple weeks, we have had all different kinds of outreach to EPA of different entities, nonprofits that want to run it.
Why take an anti-consumer bent that is in violation of the law at a time when people really need those dollars back into their wallets? How can you, let me ask it this way. Who has pressed from outside the agency to end these consumer savings under Energy Star? Which organizations and interest groups and polluters have pushed for this?
As you all know, Energy Star requires a lot of taxpayer funded salaried positions as well as a lot of tax dollars. And the government doesn't...
What is the budget for Energy Star? Do you know?
I believe about 19 million or so on top of
But if you measure that
65
against the
FTEs.
$500 billion saved for American families, isn't that an important investment, especially when it is consistent with the law passed by Congress?
Yeah, I would happily and eagerly find out from inside of the agency how they had previously calculated that figure, because I anticipate that they're taking credit for a heck of a lot more than they should.
All right,
Yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize Mr. Evans of Colorado, who is a member of the subcommittee, so I recognize him for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Administrator Zeldin, for coming today. My first question to you, you know I come from Colorado, northeast part of the state, Denver-Julesburg Basin area, Weld County. And one of the issues that we're running into up there is we're in the Front Range ozone non-attainment area for Colorado along the Front Range. But when you look at the constellation of monitors in some of the major oil and gas producing areas, that county is actually in ozone attainment, but geographically we're getting looped into the non-attainment area, which has a really, really negative impact on the over 80% of oil from Colorado that comes from my area and the 50% of natural gas that comes from my area. So curious on hearing your thoughts about how we can work together to make sure that we're promoting energy dominance and working in places like Colorado where a lot of our producers are facing some of those challenges from being geographically looped into the non-attainment area, even though they themselves are in attainment.
I think that the Colorado example highlights how there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all federal answer, that we should be working closely with Colorado on their state implementation plan, that the state implementation plan shouldn't have any unnecessary pieces, asks, demands from the federal government. It should be simple and straightforward to allow Colorado to be able to come into compliance and have that partnership with the EPA and the Trump administration. That's something I've communicated to your governor. I also don't believe that Colorado should be a victim of its own success and that so many businesses and people want to move to Colorado. Anyone who flies into Denver Airport, it might look different than when you were there 2 weeks earlier because there's that much activity of people and businesses moving to the area, and you all shouldn't be punished for that.
Thank you. Kind of along those same lines, not being punished for some of those things, one of the other areas where it really feels like we're being punished is interstate transportation of a lot of these different pollutants. For instance, you know, we have satellites, we can track this stuff. There is pollution in Colorado that originates from China. And if you took out just the contribution of Chinese pollutants along the Colorado Front Range, the entire Front Range would be in ozone attainment. And so talking about programs like the 179B waiver for international transport or exceptional events for things like wildfires, what are ways that we can work together, to your point about making sure that places like Colorado aren't punished for events that are outside of their control and that are pushing us over that attainment limit?
I agree with you, Congressman. We have taken down the 179B guidance. It's shouldn't be on our website anymore. This is an ask that has also come in from Arizona. It's come in from Utah. these international impacts are resulting in a situation where some are saying, hey, listen, if we went zero emission, if we took every car off the road, that we still would not be able to come into attainment. And obviously, we're not doing something right as a process if a state can take every car off the road and go zero emission and still not be in attainment. And there are serious consequences for EPA determining that they are in that serious non-attainment. So that is very important. As far as exceptional events, that was part of our March 12th announcement to be reconsidering that rule. We need to understand that Western states in doing forest management need flexibility to be able to keep their people safe and shouldn't have fear that by doing responsible practices of forest management that they're going to be penalized for it.
Thank you. And then one final question for you along those same lines, not being penalized for things outside of your control. State data from Colorado says 50% of the ozone along our Front Range does not originate from things that are under Colorado's control. But one of the impacts that being in a non-attainment zone has on consumers in Colorado is we are mandated in the summer months to buy reformulated gas. I just sat down with all of my gas station suppliers who said that is a $300 million impact on consumers being forced to purchase a product that's 40 cents more per gallon that has a 0.1 part per billion impact on Front Range ozone. In the last 30 seconds, can you just talk about how we can work together to protect consumers from things like the reformulated gas mandate?
Yeah, Congressman, thank you for raising it. You're not the first, but the first one since I've started these hearings. I had 2 last week. This is my 3rd, and I'll have another one tomorrow. Happy to make sure that I'm connected with you, our teams are connected, to be able to work through your asks, your concerns, your questions, to be responsive.
Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentlelady of Michigan, Ms. Dingell, for 3 minutes.
Thank you. It's great to see you, my fellow classmate. I'm going to be short, but I have a lot of questions on brownfield sites. Southeast Michigan, like many places in the country, has communities that have been left behind for too long. They've borne the brunt of toxic waste, industrial pollution, and contaminated sites. We've got a lot of legacy issues, as you know, not just in mine, but other manufacturing states, from fighting to get PFAS and lead out of our water, to implementing funding and strengthening the brownfield programs, to working across all levels of government. So I'm going to hit 3 issues quickly, and thank you for being here. I have to say that the announcement by EPA to roll back the PFAS drinking water standard really worried me. Rescinding this standard means more Americans will be poisoned and have harmful PFAS contamination that's been spreading. So too many people have already suffered the adverse effects of PFAS exposure. You know it's a forever chemical. It's in 98% of the people's blood, and we got to do something. We got to do everything possible to combat this dangerous things. For too long, Michigan, quite frankly, had a drinking water standard that was more stringent under a Republican governor than the guideline. How do we make sure people have clean and safe drinking water?
Congresswoman, as you noted, we had an announcement last week. The 4 parts per trillion MCL on PFOA and PFOS are staying. There's a procedural error in the way that the MCL was set on the other 4. We're going to fix that. It's been inaccurately reported that this is a weakening of the MCL for those 4. As I've noted since that reporting started, as a result of this process, the MCL might be lower than 4. We'll see.
That's good. I mean, just so we can continue to work on safe drinking water. Yesterday, it was announced that you've taken Flint off lifted the emergency order, which is good news for the people of Flint, and they reacted positively to it. But we still have to make sure that people have access to clean, safe, and affordable drinking water, because it's not a luxury. Will you work with us to defend last year's rule requiring all water systems remove lead from pipes within the next decade so we don't poison any more children?
Congresswoman, I would like to have a meeting with my staff, including the talented, dedicated career staff inside the Office of Water on that topic, and then huddle back up with you. As we've spoken on the phone since I was confirmed. Happy to stay in touch and do it again with regards to this question. And I would just like to say, as far as Flint, Michigan goes, it's a cause for celebration, as they pointed out to me when I visited Flint after confirmation. They've worked very hard for it, but it's important for them to know that the state and the federal government isn't abandoning Flint by lifting an emergency order.
And I still need to talk to you about the plume, but I'll put it on record because we have too many pollution problems in Michigan. So thank you. Yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize Gentlelady of Texas, Ms. Fletcher, for her 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairman Griffith, Ranking Member Tonko, and Administrator Zeldin. Thank you for extending the time to hear from all of us who are waving on. With the limited time, I do want to raise an issue for you, Administrator. I represent the energy capital of the world in Houston, and our region is home to the largest petrochemical complex in the United States, the second largest in the world. And we have the benefit of having the EPA's Region 6 lab located in Houston. This has been a particularly important issue for us in the Houston region. As I'm sure you know, we are right there on the Gulf and subject to extreme weather events with too much frequency. And so the Region 6 lab plays a critical role in helping us during these disasters. We had a hurricane last summer. We've had just record hurricanes and flooding over the last decade. In 2019, EPA announced that it was going to close the Region 6 lab in Houston and move the lab and all the employees to Ada, Oklahoma. I believe you're familiar with that facility and testified about it last week in appropriations. But I've been fighting this move ever since I got here, ever since the announcement, because it's bad for our region to have to send those samples of air and water in these potentially in disasters, but all the time as we experience these things in our region. It's also bad for EPA. I think the studies show that you'll lose a lot of really talented, experienced professionals who don't want to move from Houston to Ada, Oklahoma. So I think those are huge challenges both for our region and for the agency. I've gotten several responses over the years that people agree that we need to keep a Region 6 lab in Houston, and EPA leaders have confirmed multiple times that there will be a Region 6 lab presence in Houston. So can you confirm for me today that we can work together to make sure that EPA will keep a Region 6 lab in the Houston region?
I can tell you that at no point since I was confirmed have I had any conversation with anyone about closing the Region 6 lab in Houston. It hasn't been broached to me. I'm not aware of conversations going on at the agency on the topic. Happy to be in touch with you, work with you, and I'll look into it and let you know if anyone else has had any conversations that haven't been brought up to me.
Well, and I can tell you it's being done pursuant to the 2015 law, the federal asset sales transfer from, I guess, 2017. And so that's the idea of moving folks to Ada. It's critically important that we keep this lab in Houston, both for the agency and for our region. So I appreciate your willingness to engage on this. Many people have agreed at the agency that it is a problem, that we need to keep this lab in Houston. And of course, we want to make sure that we keep a qualified and talented workforce there too. So I appreciate the opportunity to raise this and to work with you on this to ensure that we keep this lab in Houston.
I'll look into it as soon as the hearing is over, and we'll get back in touch.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Balderson, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, thank you for being here. And I know that you have a hard stop, and guess what? I forgot my cheater. So I'm just going to ask you one question and hopefully get through this with being able to see. First, I want to thank you and the Trump administration for bringing back some much-needed common sense back to the EPA. Mr. Zeldin, I'd like to discuss an issue specific to my home state of Ohio. Ohio's nuisance rule was originally instituted as part of the state's plan to enforce compliance with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards after the passage of the Clean Air Act. In 2020, the EPA correctly removed this rule from the Ohio State Implementation Plan following considerable procedure and the removal of similar provisions in other states. However, in the final days of his term, President Biden moved to reinstate this rule. As the rule does nothing to enhance air quality protection and subjects Ohio businesses and manufacturers to weaponize litigation and lawsuits, I introduced a resolution under the Congressional Review Act to rescind this rule. Senator Husted is also carrying it in the Senate. How will your administration work to roll back unnecessary federal interference in state air pollution policies?
Congressman, I have had many meetings internally with our team at the Office of Air and Radiation with regards to this request from the state of Ohio. I have been in touch with Ohio officials. I appreciate your advocacy on behalf of your state. Those conversations and meetings between EPA and Ohio, EPA will continue, and with the state to go through this process with the state implementation plan. As you pointed out, Senator Husted has also been advocating on this. He has spoken to me, and our new Regional 5 regional administrator comes to that position coming from being the head of the Ohio EPA. So at the regional office, they are very intimately familiar with this request. So Region 5, the regional administrator, is also a key asset in working through this ask from Ohio.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it, Mr. Administrator. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Mullen, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Administrator, for being here. East Palo Alto is a vibrant community in my district on the San Francisco Bay. The people there have an incredible spirit and history of advocating for their community. It also happens to be down the street from the Meta headquarters and Stanford University. Despite being so close to such wealth, East Palo Alto residents have struggled with a history of heavy industries being sited next to residential areas. There are over 62 toxic waste sites within the city's 2.5 square miles. Not surprisingly, East Palo Alto faces challenges with air pollution. The biggest highway in the district, Highway 101, runs right through the middle of that community. The impacts of this pollution are undeniable. The community experiences significantly higher rates of asthma and respiratory disease. They have an average lifespan that's 13 years lower than the rest of San Mateo County. That's why it was such a big deal for this community when your agency last year awarded funding to a community organization to address air pollution. One local leader noted that he had, quote, residents calling me in tears saying how incredible it was to see their struggle finally recognized, end quote. Pam Jones, a resident of East Palo Alto for over 45 years, remarked that the community had been, quote, hopeful for a moment, end quote. As you know, it takes tremendous effort and organizing just to pull together a grant application. This money would have provided air purifiers to over 400 families for kids with asthma and seniors as well. This wasn't about ideology or some slogan. This was about helping children and seniors breathe easier. So Administrator Zeldin, you canceled this grant, and I'm just wondering why you made that decision.
Congressman, I don't have the details of that grant. I had for all the subcommittee members of all your colleagues on this committee, all the grants in their district. I would say that 10 times out of 10 or 100 times out of 100, when I look at the details of every single one of the grants that are canceled, there is something in it that conflicts with this administration's priorities. However, if you would like to work together on any aspects of the grant where it is in alignment with the administration's priorities to successfully resolve it for the community, happy to work with you on that.
Thank you, sir. And do you believe the EPA or the president can decide not to spend money that Congress has appropriated?
We have an obligation to spend money appropriated by Congress. We're in the middle of a fiscal year. We are not required to agree with the administration's priorities of the last presidential administration, but we will continue to get funding out the door before the end of this fiscal year with those top-line appropriations from Congress.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now, if you can bear with us, Mr. Administrator, recognize Mr. Openalty from California for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your service, and thank you for the work that you're doing to transform the EPA into an agency that, instead of being an impediment, is helping people comply with regulations and getting to a yes I know that means a lot to me and to the different air quality management districts that I represent. Wanted to ask you specifically about a concern I have about some of the reductions in force that have been occurring at the EPA. And I understand this is out of desire to right-size the agency. That's something I certainly am very supportive of. However, many of my agencies rely on the EPA to do things like issue permits or issue approvals or review plans. And there has been concern expressed that the reductions in force, even though we're transforming the EPA into a more streamlined organization, will result in delays in those approvals and permits getting issued. Can you give us some assurances that that is not the intention?
Congressman, yes, we are going to fulfill all of our statutory obligations, and the way that the reorganization was proposed a couple weeks ago allows us to better focus on those statutory obligations and reduce the backlogs. So for example, as I referenced earlier with a couple of your colleagues, we inherited a massive backlog with the pesticide review, a massive backlog with chemical review, with state implementation plans, with small refinery exemptions, and much more. We are putting resources into getting through those backlogs we inherited as quickly as possible. And with the pesticide review backlog, as one of the examples, we have already worked through over 2,300 of those backlog cases. We will continue at that pace, and we are taking measures to increase the pace of working through the backlog we inherited.
Thank you, and certainly we all support your efforts to do that. Let's work together to make sure that we're turning the EPA into the type of agency that's not an impediment to getting some of these projects accomplished that we all prioritize. One of those projects that's very near and dear to me is a project called the Barstow International Gateway that is going to shift some of our freight from the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach onto rail instead of being on the highways. What can we do at the EPA to assist in advancing freight infrastructure that makes some of those projects become a reality?
Well, there's certain aspects of permitting where an environmental assessment might be done, or technical assistance may be requested. We're here looking to help all members of this committee, to help your constituents. If there's a specific request that you have on how EPA can help you, please let us know so that we can work through it.
Okay, well, thanks. You've got a great regional administrator in Joshua Cook. He's an amazing man, and we thank you for your service and his, and let's work together on getting some of these projects across the finish line. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Zeldin, for staying 3 more minutes. As you know, this hearing follows a 26.5-hour markup of a bill that is still moving its way through Congress, that sends a clear message to the states to do more with less. And if members of the Freedom Caucus get their way, states will have to do even more with even less, depending on what the final cuts to Medicaid look like. But even though sometimes government governs in silos, people don't live in silos, and state governments are dealing with all of the impacts of the Trump administration. So you take a state like Virginia that has the 2nd highest number of federal employees, has already been hit hard by mass layoffs as our labor market is cooling. Our unemployment rate is expected to reach its highest rate since 2021, bucking a national trend, and our GDP growth is looking to slow down. And that's at the same time that the Commonwealth, like other states, is going to have to look to fill severe budget gaps due to Medicaid cuts, funding cuts, and the shifting of more responsibility to the states. And so the proposed budget cuts more than $1 billion from categorical grants to the states. And these grants give states a baseline capacity that they need to carry out federally mandated environmental protections. So slashing them handcuffs the state's ability to continue to address pollution. And earlier this month, the Environmental Council of States sent the EPA a letter highlighting how states carry out more than 90% of the nation's federal environmental programs, and states, state legislatures, and the business community depend on Congress to fund their efforts through grants and partnerships with the EPA. This letter warned that if Congress were to adopt the White House recommendation for discretionary spending, states may be required to terminate primary, delegation, or authorization agreements and return full program implementation to the EPA, which would overwhelm the EPA and have detrimental impacts to the economic development. So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter this letter into the record.
Without objection? So ordered.
And I'll get this question out, and I know you're going to have to answer it later, but I really want to know how states are supposed to implement critical environmental programs under the drastic cuts proposed in the budget, and if the states can't and are forced to return those responsibilities to the EPA, how do you plan to carry them out with the severe staffing and funding cuts at the federal level?
Well, Congresswoman, I know we only have 8 seconds here, so we are happy to follow up, but we at the EPA are going to fulfill all of our statutory obligations. We are receiving many requests for additional primacy coming from states. I just signed off on moving forward with Class 1 through 6. The primacy request coming from Arizona, we're dealing with one right now. The request came in from Texas and elsewhere, and we've signed off on 25 state implementation plans, 16 of which were backlogged from the last administration. We want to advance cooperative partnership with states. We want to hear their concerns and try to figure out how to help them deliver clean air, land, and water for their constituents, which is an obligation for all levels of government. I appreciate your concern and your interest on this particular issue, and welcome the opportunity to work with you on it.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Seeing no additional members, I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record any documents not previously admitted into the record included on the staff hearing documents list without objection. So ordered. I remind members they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record, and I ask the witness to respond to the questions promptly without objection. Subcommittee is adjourned. Thank you very much, Lee, for being patient with me.
Thank you both.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Chair.